Chapter 803. After a simple interrogation, the young quasi-sorcerer finally managed to pry out the whereabouts of the item from the dying blonde man. A few days ago, Lady Mary had just led a team to destroy a level 2 resource point belonging to the Kamara family. The Kamara family's magi stationed there died on the spot, but the resources stored in the Secret Plains warehouse were reduced by more than half. Many Scarlet acolytes were sent out to hunt down the remaining members of the Kamara family who had escaped, and he was undoubtedly very lucky to actually be able to intercept the group of sorcerer apprentices who had sneaked out from the resource point here. According to the Scarlet family's rules, he had the right to take 1/3 of the spoils of war. Once he thought of the huge amount of resources in the level 2 resource point, the young quasi-sorcerer's face revealed a strange smile of pain and happiness. The storage ring that contained a large amount of resources was hidden in the accompanying carriage of the apprentice team. When the young quasi-wizard happily cut off the head of the blonde man and strode towards one of the carriages, a gloomy old man, wearing a white robe, stepped out of the darkness with a magic staff that was even taller than him in his hand and sneered. In front of his chest hung a maple grass emblem of the Kamala family. Sorcerer, an official sorcerer. The Scarlet quasi-sorcerer, who had dominated the battlefield just a moment ago, was so scared that he kept retreating. He looked at the Kamara family magus who had suddenly appeared and muttered something. As if remembering how terrifying a magus was, the Scarlet quasi-sorcerer shouted and wanted to escape into the darkness. However, a black tentacle extended from the ground and instantly wrapped around him, making it hard for him to move. With a bang, he fell into a pool of blood that had yet to congeal. Stay there. If I find out that you do anything dishonest, you know what the consequences will be. The sinister old man hissed at the Scarlet quasi-sorcerer coldly. After saying this, he walked in front of a pack horse that was pulling a carriage and stabbed the stomach of the horse like a knife with his right hand. How could this pack horse withstand such a terrifying injury? After bouncing a few times, it twitched and fell to the ground dead. When the old man pulled his right hand out of the bloody stomach of the pack horse, a large amount of filthy and smelly substances poured out. In the middle of this filth, a glistening yellow bronze ring rolled out. Ha! Luckily, these little fellows are smart enough to bring back all the resources stored in that resource point for the past 5 years. Now, the family's shortage of potions has been reduced by more than half. Ha! Then, just as the sinister old man was about to reach for the storage ring, the ground where the ring was located suddenly cracked, and endless black beetles surged out like a tide. The ring was instantly submerged in the sea of black beetles. Damn it, it's a bug shaman. The old man instantly understood what was going on. He tapped the magic wand in his hand, and a strange ripple spread out from under his feet in all directions. All the black beetles that stepped into the ripples struggled in pain for a few seconds before exploding into balls of bloody paste, instantly dyeing the area around the old man into a colorful sauce jar. After blocking the swarm's attack, the old man quickly took out a small reagent bottle and poured the medicine inside into his mouth. When the green wings of wind behind him lifted him up quickly, a sharp whistling sound came from the surrounding void. 3 or 4 transparent shadows flashed past the old man's body. The old man only had time to let out a scream before he turned into a pile of body parts that fell from the sky. The sinister-looking old man only had time to let out a blood-curdling scream before he turned into a pile of scattered corpse pieces that rained down from midair. The Scarlet sorcerer crawled up from the ground, not bothering to check his injuries. He quickly flashed the badge on his chest and said loudly, "Greetings, Lord Bliss." The Scarlet quasi-shaman crawled up from the ground, not bothering to check the injuries on his body. He quickly flashed the badge on his chest and said loudly, "Greetings, Lord Blitz." Actually, the bug shaman Bliss had yet to appear. He did not even have time to check his injuries. He quickly flashed the badge on his chest and said loudly, "Greetings, Lord Bliss." In fact, the insect Lich Bliss had yet to appear at this moment. The insects that were lingering around the magus flesh and blood carried the storage ring and slowly walked to the crack in the ground. In the next moment, the bug shaman, Bliss, had yet to appear. The beetles, surrounded by the sorcerer's flesh, carried the storage ring and slowly moved to the crack in the ground. In the next moment, more black beetles piled up and slowly formed a strange human figure. The reward for this mission is on your head. Take this ring to Lady Mary to receive your reward. Thousands of squirming black beetles pieced together to form a lifelike humanoid sorcerer. The beetles opened their mouths and spat out noisy and hoarse cries. Soon after, the ring was thrown into the young quasi-sorcerer's arms. Ander was overjoyed when he heard this. He carefully kept the ring in his pocket. "Have you cleared out the people in this camp?" The beetles turned around and looked at the terrified people hiding in a corner of the camp. "Not yet." Ander quickly took out a piece of paper and read it aloud. "Master Insect Shaman, I've investigated. There are 2 teams in this camp that belong to the Kamara family." The beetles shrieked. "The Red Leaf Trading Company and the Giant Deer Caravan. The Red Leaf Trading Company belongs to the Kamara family, Earl Winrath's territory. The Giant Deer Caravan has 70% investment from the Kamara family." Like a death sentence, the people in the crowd who belonged to the 2 teams shuddered and their teeth chattered as Ander named the names. The people around them ran away from them. He. How dare you work with the Kamara family? Go to hell." As the insect shaman growled, the black swarm of beetles drowned the powerless commoners. The tide-like swarm of beetles moved left and right among the crowd. They did not hurt anyone who was not involved. They only dragged the people who belonged to the 2 teams into the sea of beetles. When the gnawing sounds disappeared, the black beetles returned to the insect shaman's feet. There were more than 20 white skeletons in the camp. There was not even a trace of flesh or bones left on them. After cleaning up the campsite, the worm wizard dispersed into tens of thousands of black beetles again, burrowing into the ground and disappearing without a trace. The victorious scarlet sorcerer Ander did not dare to stay any longer. He jumped on his magic horse and galloped into the darkness. Only when the surroundings of the camp had completely calmed down did the people who had hidden in the nearby forest dare to slowly enter the camp. Seeing the ground covered in blood and the corpses strewn all over the place, everyone felt a chill in their hearts. In this world ruled by magi, as commoners without any extraordinary powers, they did not have the right to participate in the magi's disputes. No matter how much trouble the 2 magi families had, there would always be a day when they would sit down and negotiate. However, commoners like them, if they were to get involved, other than dying a dubious death, there was no other possibility. Just from the situation tonight, it was obvious that the newly established Scarlet family had the upper hand. Not only did they occupy the other party's resource point, they even dared to kill the acolytes and magi of the opposing side. This clearly showed the huge difference in strength between the 2 sides. It was said that the Scarlet family did not even have a rank 3 magus, while the Kamara family had a rank 3 magus to support them. How did the battle strength of the 2 sides flip? The people who did not know much about the secrets of these magi could only sigh and sigh as they packed up their belongings and left the temporary camp that night. A magus of the Kamara family had died here, so the other side would definitely not send people to investigate. If they continued to stay here, they would definitely become the target of revenge and investigation. Therefore, most of the caravans and travelers quietly left the campsite, leaving this land of constant war without looking back. Vilnan, the location of the Northern Witch Council. In a magic secret room in the ancient castle, Alice was happily chatting with a few powerful witch leaders. Logically speaking, the witches who could appear here were all rank 4 witch leaders, and Alice's insignificant rank 2 witch leaders should not even be here. However, with the strange ability of the Destiny Witches, none of the witch leaders dared to ignore Alice's words. After all, the strength of the Destiny Witches depended on their compatibility with the power of destiny, not the level of their own strength. Of course, the stronger they were, the stronger their ability to control the power of destiny. For any witch leader, this was something they could only be close to, not hostile. In fact, in the past, when the first Destiny Witch was at her strongest, she could give any witch leader a powerful destiny aura of +3 luck. This also meant that in the next year, this witch leader could become the darling of the power of destiny and always be in a state of overflowing good luck. How terrifying was the power of +3 luck? With +1 luck, it meant that this lucky person could eat gold beans when eating, drink water could produce gold bars, go out and meet a noble, go into a mountain and meet a vixen who came to repay a debt of gratitude, jump off a cliff and meet a powerful old man who was eager to take in a disciple. With +2 luck, it was completely possible to walk calmly in a sea of fire and sleep soundly in a forest of spears and arrows. Just by casually checking one's background, one could find out that one was the descendant of a powerful wizard. With +3 luck, one could win every bet, no matter how small the odds were. In her hands, she would always win. If she fought with a powerful enemy, the enemy would either bite her tongue while chanting a spell or accidentally backfire on her witchcraft, causing half of her body to be paralyzed. In short, witches with the blessing of luck were simply ridiculously strong. Although the current rank 2 Alice did not have such a terrifying blessing ability, many witch leaders saw her strong development potential and were still willing to wait for her to continue to grow. Chapter 804. Alice, why did you summon all of us here this time? After the previous witch council, the leaders no longer dared to underestimate this young witch who had completely taken control of the Tower of Destiny. Hence, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, could only frown and ask impatiently. Over the years, the expansion of the Witches of Death in the plains had not been smooth. They were fighting to the death with the orcs of the world of gods in various planes. At this critical juncture, anyone who was dragged from the bloody planar battlefield to this ancient castle that was about to completely decay would be filled with impatience like Thuna. Although the other two witch leaders did not speak, their expressions were similar. As far as I know, it seems that none of you have caught a suitable magic pet yet. Among the witches, Alice's age was not even a fraction of that of the others. Naturally, she could only humble herself and use gentle means to win over everyone. Do you have a suitable introduction? Thuna's expression changed. How about a rank 4 dragon pet? Alice asked, smiling mysteriously. Where is it? Is there a group of dragons protecting it? Which lineage is it? As soon as Alice finished speaking, the 3 Tier 4 witches could not help but ask again and again. Even Circe, the leader of the dark witches who had the worst relationship with Alice, could not help but have her eyes light up. To be honest, when other Tier 4 witches talked about dragons of the same tier, they would probably frown as if they were facing a great enemy. However, the group of Tier 4 witches in front of her were all beaming with joy at the mention of Tier 4 dragons. They looked as if they would immediately rush over to rob Alice of the location. If Grimm could see this scene, he would definitely feel a little sad for the future of the Tier 4 dragons in the Lance Plain. You know that the wizard who has been supporting me from behind has a dragon plane, Alice said hesitantly, her pretty face suddenly flushing red. A dragon plane. The 3 Tier 4 witches let out sighs of happiness at the same time. Even Sylvia, the leader of the Pale Witches, could not help but tremble. Of course, this wasn't fear, but an exaggerated expression of extreme excitement. I've long heard of the dragon plane. I heard that the sky is filled with dragons, and there are dragon nests everywhere. There are dragons of all lineages, and we can capture any dragon we want. I've always dreamed that if I could have such a plane, I'd definitely faint from happiness. Sylvia licked her lips and spoke of the restlessness in her heart in a dreamy tone. Although the other 2 older witch leaders were not as excited as Sylvia, their passionate and bright eyes revealed their true feelings. Alice, are you saying that the control of that plane is still in the hands of that wizard? Thuna asked with a calm expression. Alice nodded silently. I'm going to meet that wizard. Circe stood up and said, How can such a good thing fall into the hands of a weak wizard? I'll pay him enough to get the world waymark from the dragon plane. Alice's eyes immediately widened in shock. Thuna smiled faintly and said, All right, you guys stop scaring Alice. Tell us, since that wizard found us through you, He wants us to help him deal with the Tier 4 dragon in there. Alice let out a helpless, bitter laugh and nodded silently in agreement. Although she had the ability to control the power of destiny, it was still not enough to spy on a Tier 4 witch. Tier 4 witches already had the powerful ability to destroy the world, and their understanding and control of the plane's laws was not something a cat like her could compare to. Moreover, to be able to become a witch leader, which one of them had not experienced thousands of years of bloodshed and scheming? How could her self-righteous little tricks and thoughts escape the eyes and ears of these old foxes? Therefore, Alice no longer spoke empty words and pretended to be sincere. Instead, she used real benefits as bait and launched a thrilling negotiation with several Tier 4 witch leaders. In the end, both sides reached a basic cooperation agreement. The Crimson family, led by Alice and Grimm, regularly opened up the land's plane they controlled to the witch factions in front of them, allowing the powerful witches to capture dragon pets. Correspondingly, the Death, Darkness, and Ashen witch factions also had to respect the Crimson family's control over the land's plane. They had to strictly follow the Crimson family's established procedures to enter and exit the land's plane, and they could not destroy the original ecosystem of the land's plane. In addition, for every successful capture of a dragon pet, the witch who was the victim had to pay a large amount of magic crystals or resources as compensation according to the agreement. After this series of agreements was signed, it meant that the Crimson family had conditionally opened up the land's plane to the three witch factions and recruited some powerful fighters. Of course, the price the Crimson family had to pay was the powerful, pure-blooded dragon in the land's plane. The Dragon Lord was there, and as long as you had the strength, you could go and capture it. If you caught it, the dragon would belong to the witch, and the dragon nest and territory would belong to the Crimson family. The witch only had to pay a corresponding amount of magic crystals as compensation, no matter how one looked at it. This was a guaranteed profit without any cost. After the agreement was signed, Alice brought up the information related to their target, the Blue Sky Wing SKRYL. With the dragon trader Thunder dragging arms around, the secrets that Grimm had been unable to find out about in the past were no longer secret to him. In terms of the dragon lineage, the Sorcerer World's way of categorizing them was obviously different from other worlds. The so-called Blue Sky Wing SKRYL was actually a blue dragon, which was also known as a wind dragon by the sorcerers. This type of dragon was adept at controlling the power of the wind, and it had the fastest flying speed among all the dragons. Therefore, if one wanted to capture or kill a wind dragon, the first thing they had to pay attention to was how to limit its terrifying speed. However, it was not Grimm's turn to worry about these problems. Instead, it became the biggest problem for the witch leaders. After obtaining detailed information about this Grade 4 dragon, the Dark Witch Circe and the Pale Witch Sylvia chose to give up one after another. Only the Undead Witch Thuna's eyes flickered, showing great interest. Since this Grade 4 dragon was not their cup of tea, Circe and Sylvia took their leave. However, before they left their contact details with each other. Circe naturally preferred shadow-type dragons, such as the Night Shadow Dragon, Black Dragon, or Void Dragon. Sylvia, on the other hand, preferred ice dragons and spectra dragons. Before she left, Circe, the leader of the Dark Witches, turned around and gave Alice a meaningful look. Although I don't like you very much, from now on, I will no longer participate in the dispute between you and the First Witch of Destiny. From now on, you don't have to worry about me secretly attacking you. With that, Circe left without looking back. Hearing this, Alice's tightly clenched fists finally loosened. All this while, she had been vigilant against the open and hidden attacks from other witch factions. Even those witches who were the kindest to her, she did not dare to easily trust them. The main reason for this was the existence of the First Destiny Witch. According to the trajectory of the past battles for destiny, Alice was destined to die in the Tower of Destiny, and everything she had would become the nourishment needed for the growth of the new Destiny Witch clone. However, it was precisely because of her existence that the plans of the First Destiny Witch, who had planned all this tens of thousands of years ago, came to nothing. From a moment Alice became the official leader of the Destiny Witches, she had become a thorn in the side of some big shot in the void. If not for the protection of the Sorcerer World's will, Alice would have long since become a skeleton in a grave, killed by the extremely powerful First Destiny Witches' schemes. The reason Alice was still alive was not because she was intelligent, nor was it because the enemy could not do anything to her, but because the enemy needed her alive. It could be imagined that even if the First Destiny, which used some means to kill Alice, the immense power of Destiny Alice had gathered would only return to the Sorcerer World. It would not bring her any benefits. However, if she allowed Alice to grow, when Alice reached the 4th grade, she would have to step out of the Sorcerer World sooner or later. At that time, a delicious fruit would grow, and she would only need to gently pluck it to obtain everything Alice currently had. In this way, although there were some deviations from the plan, the result was exactly the same. Therefore, during this period of time, the First Destiny, which had also been secretly using some means to control and guide Alice's development, but she had no intention of killing her. However, when it came to those who could interfere with Alice's development, the First Destiny, which was unprecedentedly ruthless and ruthless. This could be seen from Grimm's unexpected misfortune. Since Circe had already expressed her stance, it meant that the entire Dark Witches would no longer intervene in the internal disputes between the two Destiny Witches. No matter what, this was a huge piece of good news for Alice. If she could remove or use the power nodes that the Destiny Witches had placed in the plane one by one, it would allow Alice to regain a certain advantage in this unbalanced confrontation. After getting such a guarantee, Alice finally smiled comfortably. Thuna was not interested in investigating the little secret between Circe and Alice. She was more interested in the internal environment and strange laws of the Plane of Lance. Only by considering all of this in advance would she have a greater chance of capturing the Blue Sky Wing. Chapter 805 Lance Plane, Metal Fortress. As a dense white light shone out from the teleportation room, intense spatial fluctuations began to wash away everything inside. However, the void energy was blocked by a metal partition filled with magical energy, unable to disperse into the wider space outside. When the ultra-long distance interplanar teleportation was completed, two blurry figures gradually appeared in the teleportation room. Welcome, Lady Thuna, to the Metal Fortress. As the owner of this place, Grimm naturally had to bear the responsibility of receiving them. Seeing the 2-level 4 witches in the teleportation room, Grimm could not help but feel his scalp go numb. Even his breathing became hurried. The one in the lead was none other than the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, whom Alice had just introduced. As for the one behind her, it was a level 4 vice leader of the Witches of Death, Phimis. Truth be told, this was Grimm's first time seeing the legendary level 4 witches. Hence, while he was nervous, he also felt an uncontrollable excitement. Thuna was a powerful witch of death who had been famous for a long time. She was not ugly. On the contrary, she had an indescribable beauty. Her skin was fair and translucent, her facial features exquisite and cold. Her long silver hair was tied behind her head, and she wore a gorgeous brown leather armor. It was hard to tell from her appearance that she was an old woman who was almost 1,000 years old. If one ignored the unpredictable, ice-cold energy of death of a level, for which Grimm could easily mistake her for a witch who was only a few years older than Alice. Behind Suna was Phimis. She was just as beautiful, just as cold, and her entire body was overflowing with a cold and unapproachable power of death. This Phimis seemed to be walking the path of a necromancer. She wore a cloth robe and had a white bone staff with a short handle at her waist. The dense aura of death that overflowed from it was almost suffocating. As the 2-level 4 witches of death stepped into the metal fortress, Grimm could clearly feel that the ambient temperature had dropped by at least 7 degrees. For some reason, Grimm felt a cold wind blowing on his back. Especially when Thuna's pupil-less white eyes stared at Grimm, he felt a chilling aura from the inside out. Beep detected a strong source of negative energy radiation. Host body is suffering from the attack of negative energy. Estimated body reaction will occur in 3 minutes and 26 seconds. Please leave as soon as possible. Please leave as soon as possible. Looking at the negative energy radiation value that the AI chip projected in his mind, the glaring blood red number had already broken through 300 degrees. However, it did not stop and continued to rise rapidly. 300 degrees? Didn't this mean that the entire space within 100 meters of the Witch of Death was being attacked by up to 300 degrees of negative energy? This intensity was comparable to the radiation of nuclear reactors on Earth in his previous life. Furthermore, this wasn't even the strength of the death which at her peak. It was just the energy reaction caused by the power of death that she had unintentionally leaked out of her body. From this, it could be inferred just how terrifying a full-powered strike from the other party would be. It was probably no less than the explosion of a small nuclear bomb. Grimm smiled helplessly. Leave? As the owner of this place, he had been scared off by the arrival of a rank 4 witch. If such a scandal were to spread, Grimm would become a laughingstock in the hearts of the northern witches. Fortunately, Thuna did not seem to want to embarrass Grimm. After sizing him up for a long time, she finally retracted the leaking magic energy and began to scan the tall and majestic metal fortress in the middle of the mountain. With Thuna's powerful spiritual force, she almost instantly discovered the peculiarity of the metal fortress. The entire metal fortress was filled with an indescribable aura of magic energy. Moreover, this aura was not like that of ordinary magic facilities that would dissipate in the internal space. Instead, it was like a human's meridians and blood flowing through every inch of the metal. From the inside to the outside, from top to bottom, the entire metal fortress was like a strange life form, moving rhythmically with the surging magic energy. It was like a person's breathing and pulse. Could this metal fortress be a metal life form? Thuna couldn't help but ask after looking around. With Thuna's experience, she had already barged into close to 100-dimensional worlds with vastly different environments, creatures, and resources. She had seen all sorts of strange life forms, so she wasn't too surprised by the strange metallic life forms. The reason she was surprised was that she had actually discovered a completely different metal life form under the control of a puny rank 2 wizard. What kind of power did this wizard use to subdue this strange metallic life form? Hearing the rank 4 witch's question, Grimm hurriedly forced a smile and said loudly, "Gazruvi, since Lady Thuna has discovered you, come out and meet her." As his loud voice reverberated in the spacious metal fortress, the metal wall beside him suddenly split open to reveal a large door. Gazruvi's subbrain, Gru, walked into the metal hall with heavy footsteps. Although the Crimson family had decided to work together with a few powerful witches to develop this lance plane, they still had to protect their own secrets. Within this metal fortress, apart from the rank 3 brain monster Gazruvi, the most important secret was probably the magic furnace that continuously supplied magic energy to the metal fortress. At least before the Crimson family had absolute protection, Grimm did not plan to reveal the existence of the magic furnace to other magi. Otherwise, this magical device that could continuously absorb magic energy from the void would definitely attract the covetous gazes of many high-ranked magi. If those high-ranked magi obtained this technology and combined it with their vast reserves of knowledge and resources, they would definitely be able to create tens or even tens of thousands of magic furnaces. At that time, the Crimson family would not even be able to get their hands on the leftovers. Hence, only Gazruvi's subbrain, Gru, had appeared this time. Gru's body was no longer powered by the magic furnace, but a honeycomb-style magic battery array. Although this technology and method were novel, it was not enough to attract the greed of magi from outside. As for the rank 3 brain monster Gazruvi, he brought the magic furnace with him and hid in the depths of the metal fortress. In order to be safe, Gazruvi had even set up a spiritual barrier outside the magic furnace. Combined with layers of metal walls and 1,000-meter thick rock layers, it was able to prevent the rank 4 witches from probing it. Looking at Gru's ugly and bloated appearance, as well as his strength that was only at the peak of rank 2, the two rank 4 witches quickly lost interest in studying it. Themis and I need a secret room to rest for a while. Also, I need more detailed and comprehensive information on the blue sky wing. Send all of this to my room. With that, Thuna and Themis coldly led by Gru to a quiet room to rest. Although they were rank 4 witches, they still needed a long time to recover from the suppression of the lance plane. At the same time, they also needed to digest the latest information on the blue sky wing in order to come up with a surefire plan to capture it. If the plan failed and the target creature became vigilant, it would be extremely difficult to hunt it again. Hence, the two witches had no choice but to be cautious. Strictly speaking, a Tier 4 dragon in the plane of existence would definitely have a base combat strength far above that of an ordinary Tier 4 magus. Although Thuna was definitely not an ordinary witch in the Blue Sky Wings territory, in the Blue Sky Wings plane of existence, she would still have to endure a great deal of suppression. Under such circumstances, even she did not have absolute confidence in suppressing a Tier 4 dragon. Hence, after giving it some thought, Thuna decided to transfer one of the Tier 4 vice commanders from the demiplane. This way, with two powerful Tier 4 witches of death working together, the chances of success would be much higher. According to legend, the Blue Sky Wing, SKRYL, lived in a place called the Storm Fortress. It was located at the peak of a mountain that was thousands of meters tall. Few people could be seen there, and the air was thin. Even the most majestic mountain eagle could not withstand the cold north wind and could not spread its wings to soar high. Other than a group of dragonborn servants that he had specially nurtured, there were also some mutated wind elves that helped SKRYL protect his palace and dragon nest. As a Tier 4 dragon, SKRYL not only had a direct territory in the Lance Plain, but also a vast territory in 3 small plains. In fact, in a certain small plain, the Blue Sky Wing, SKRYL, had even become a guardian creature that was devoutly worshipped. He had also grasped some of the ways to use the power of faith. Every year, the 5th of November was the time when the 3 demi-planes opened their planar gates and offered tributes to the Great Blue Sky Wing. Apart from countless fruits and peaches, there were also countless rare treasures. Of course, there were also native beauties with a strong foreign aura. The foreign natives suddenly came to a place with a harsh environment like the Storm Fortress. Not only did they have to endure the terrifying backlash of the plane, they also had to endure the harsh selection of the environment. Of the 100 native beauties that came to the Storm Fortress, less than a third could survive for more than 10 days. The rest would also die miserably from the arduous daily labor, becoming pitiful wretches whose souls wandered in another world. With the powerful physique of a Tier 4 dragon, there was no need to talk about the coarse skin and dark skin of the native beauties. Even if they attracted the attention of the Tier 4 dragon with their beautiful looks and graceful figures, if the dragon transformed into a strong and muscular man and asked them to serve him in bed, the outcome would still be death. Chapter 806. The Storm Fortress. Standing at the foot of the steep cliff and looking up, it was almost impossible to see the magnificent palace that was high up in the clouds. Grimm's group of 7 passed through many checkpoints and finally arrived at the lonely cliff in the middle of the mountains. From here, they would have to climb more than 3,000 meters to reach the Grade 4 Dragon's Palace. We'll be going up first. Remember to follow the plan, Thuna said coldly. She raised her hand and summoned a Grade 4 zombie dragon, which carried her and Themis to the top of the cliff. Seeing that the 2 Grade 4 witches had set off, Grimm said calmly, "Arms, it's time for us to go." Arms, who had transformed into his human form, was extremely reluctant, but he knew that there was no time to waste. Once the Grade 4 witches started fighting, everyone close to the battlefield would become their target. One of the main reasons he had come along was to control the Grade 3 Emerald Dragon Beauty, Aratina. Aratina had been staying in the Storm Fortress for the past few days. Arms had tried all sorts of methods to lure her away, but to no avail. Helplessly, today was the day the Grade 4 witches decided to take down the dragon. If he didn't come, there would be no eggs left unharmed. Aratina would most likely become the sacrifice of this battle. Thus, with a furious roar, Arm's body rapidly expanded. In 5 seconds, he had transformed from a young man who was 2 meters tall to a powerful 30-meter-long thunder dragon. Grim, Mary, Zacha, and Tigula climbed onto the back of the Type 3 thunder dragon, reaching out with their hands to grab the terrifying 1-meter-long spikes on its back. Roar, with a short dragon roar, Arms unfurled his huge dragon wings that spanned over 20 meters and beat the air with all his might. With a stomp of his powerful hind legs, his huge body carried the 4 witches and rose into the air. He chased after the dragon that had turned into a tiny black dot, heading straight for the top of the cliff. In order not to alert the storm fortress, Grim and the others used the fastest and most direct method to launch a surprise attack on the blue sky wing. One after the other, the 2 giant dragons flapped their wings with all their might and pounced towards the palace at a perpendicular angle. Due to the great speed of the thunder dragon, Grim could only barely hold on to the spine of the thunder dragon. His body flew out like a flag. Mary also knew how to fly, so it was easy for her to deal with this situation. Only the dragon man Zacha and the goblin Tigu couldn't fly or float. They could only tightly grab onto the back of the thunder dragon and close their eyes. They felt the biting cold wind blow past their ears and let out an ear-piercing whistle. Since this mountain was the private property of the Tier 4 dragon, the steep rocky path from the foot of the mountain to the top of the cliff was guarded by draconids. Each and every one of them was guarding the caves on the cliff. When they saw the 2 giant dragons rushing straight up in front of them, they immediately shouted and rang the copper bells one after another. Then, they rushed towards the peak along the stone path in groups of 3 to 5. Without the giant dragons leading the way, Grim and the others would probably have to fight their way from the foot of the mountain to the peak. At that time, no matter how slow the blue sky wing was, it would have made all the necessary preparations before Grim and the others could reach the peak. Moreover, this was the Lance Plain, the Plain of the Dragons. Even if SKRYR racked his brains, he would never have imagined that 2 Tier 4 powerhouses would come knocking on his door and launch a surprise attack on his luxurious palace in such a desperate manner. The 3,000-meter cliff was already halfway across in the blink of an eye. Just as the 2 giant dragons smashed through the clouds and continued to fly upwards, the air around them suddenly emitted a strange, piercing laughter. "Careful! Those wind elves are coming," Mary's sharp eyes warned. Grim did his best to block the whistling wind that blew in his face as he turned his head to look for those translucent mutated wind elves. With the AI chip's elemental vision, Grim quickly discovered a few green silhouettes that disappeared in a flash. Wind elves were actually a type of mutated wind elemental. They already had the basic form of a human, and their entire bodies were condensed from greenish-white flowing wind elemental energy. As they were extremely adept at riding the wind, they were especially difficult to deal with in places with turbulent air currents. They flew extremely quickly, and the color of their bodies blended in with the background. It was almost impossible for ordinary people to catch a glimpse of them. Moreover, they rarely engaged in positional warfare with their enemies. Instead, they relied on their high speed to stab at their enemies with their transparent wind spears. Once they hit their target, they would quickly escape. If they were on flat ground, they would not be afraid of such an attack. However, they were now attached to the back of the lightning dragon arms and were doing their best to ascend. At this moment, the group did not have any methods to deal with the wind elves. Above them, the 3 wind elves tried to use their wind spears to fling the 2 witches off the zombie dragon's back. Unfortunately, just as they neared the zombie dragon, they let out an indescribable shriek and their bodies collapsed. The encounter of their 3 companions caused a large group of wind elves to scatter in fear. They no longer dared to provoke the zombie dragon and the 2 witches on its back. Turning their gazes, the group of wind elves could not help but rush towards Grim and the others. The lightning dragon arm's body trembled, and a large amount of lightning began to gather at its throat. It seemed to want to use a thunderstorm to chase these annoying fellows away. You don't have to worry about it. Leave these fellows to me. Grim lightly patted the lightning dragon's back, and it immediately dispersed the lightning and continued to fly upwards with all its might. Grim's head swayed slightly, and a blue light flashed in his eyes. He quickly locked onto the 7 wind elves that were diving down. In the next second, Grim's eyes emitted a red light, and 2 scorching rays of sunlight swept across the sky like lasers. As the lasers swept across, the transparent wind elves suddenly revealed themselves, and with mournful wails, they turned into a chaotic air current. These wind elves were only at grade 1. Apart from their transparent bodies and high-flying speed, they did not have any other advantages. If it was any other magus, they would probably have to rely on area of effect spells to protect themselves from the attacks. However, with the AI chip's elemental vision, Grim was not affected by the harsh environment. He continuously shot out rays of sunlight, turning the human-shaped wind elementals into chaotic air currents. The 40 to 50 wind elves could only sneak around the periphery, but they could not fly close to Grim and the others. For a moment, both sides were in a deadlock as they rushed to the top of the cliff. Due to the interference of the wind elves, Grim and the others were slightly slower. By the time the Type 3 Thunder Dragon arms landed on the cliff, the zombie dragon and the 2 witches were nowhere to be seen. However, a path of blood that was smeared with the broken limbs and flesh of the dragonoid warriors extended from their eyes all the way to the beautiful palace. Listening carefully, they could faintly hear the roars and roars of the dragonoid warriors coming from the depths of the palace. They've already killed their way in. Let's guard the entrance of the palace. According to the plan, the rank 4 dragon was the main target of the 2 rank 4 witches. As support, Grim and the others were only in charge of clearing out the small fries. Arita, the lightning dragon arms roared, intending to charge into the palace, but was stopped by Grim. Arms, it's already a battle between rank 4 powerhouses. Are you sure you want to take the risk? But Aratina is inside. Don't worry. Their target is only that Skrill. I've already informed them that they won't do anything to your Aratina. But there are no buts. You can choose to defend this place with us and wait for the battle inside to end. Or you can charge in now and disrupt Lady Thuna's arrangements. Choose one of 2 paths. After stammering for a long time, the rank 3 lightning dragon arms finally lowered his arrogant head. I'll stay. Grim finally heaved a sigh of relief. All this while, he had wanted to pull this rank 3 lightning dragon into his war chariot. However, Arms had always been arrogant and unruly. He rarely listened to Grim's arrangements and plans. This time, Grim had gone all out. Only by using the might of a Tier 4, which to suppress Arm's aura, did he manage to do so. The Tier 4 Blue Sky Wing, SKRYL, had plenty of powerful subordinates under him. Aside from the 2 Tier 3 Dragon Lords, there was also a Tier 3 Dragonoid aide. Although the Tier 3 dragons were Skrill's subordinates, they had their own territories in the surrounding areas. Only when SKRYR summoned them would they rush over from thousands of miles away to receive their orders. Hence, aside from Skrill, only the Tier 3 Little Emerald Female Dragon, Aratina, and a Tier 3 Dragonoid Chieftain remained in the Storm Fortress's vicinity. Grim had been reluctant to let Arms leave because his team might not be able to face the Tier 3 Dragonoid Chieftain head-on. Hence, he had left Arms behind to deal with the Tier 3 Dragonoid Chieftain. Grim and the others did not have to wait for long. Half a minute later, a large group of Draconid, led by a burly Draconid leader, roared as they charged out of the Draconid camp on one side of the cliff. Compared to the large group of Tier 1 and 2 Dragonoids, the Tier 3 Dragonoid Chieftain's appearance and build were particularly eye-catching. As soon as the Tier 3 Dragonoid arrived before Grim's group, before it could even issue its first command, Arms had already charged at the Dragonoid. The Tier 3 Thunder Dragon's massive body collided with the Dragonoid Chieftain, and the 2 Dragonoids collided with each other. Chapter 807. These 2 colossal beings crushed through the middle of the Dragonoid army, instantly injuring them greatly. be it the Thunder Dragon's powerful tail that swept past them or the Draconid leader's body that weighed a ton. The Draconid warrior's body would instantly cave in, breaking bones and snapping tendons as they sprawled on the ground, vomiting mouthfuls of blood. You go deal with the wind, elves in the sky. Grim looked at Mary and ordered loudly. Mary's attacks were weak, and she had no good way of dealing with the thick-skinned dragonoids. Hence, Grim gave her the simplest task. Zatcha, guard the palace gates. Don't let a single one in. Tygol, charge with me. After quickly assigning tasks, Grim tossed out a demon puppet core and summoned a terrifying Balrog. Then, he roared and began his second transformation. With a flick of his finger, 2 towering Balrogs rose from the ground at the same time. Their bodies, shrouded in flames, swayed as they fired fireballs at the Dragonoid army, as if they were free. Tygol, who was called out, responded. He released the Goblin Ripper from his puppet amulet and dove into it. In the next second, the Goblin Ripper let out a low roar and began to move its body. It brandished its metal chainsaw and drill, blocking the Dragonoid army's path without hesitation. A series of magma fireballs exploded amidst the Draconid ranks. Violent flame shockwaves and magma rain that splashed wantonly annihilated the 11 Draconids who charged at the forefront. They collapsed in the flames, and the metal armor on their bodies quickly softened in the extreme heat, turning into flowing crimson molten iron, burning the flesh and dragon scales below and making them crackle. Grim and the terrifying Balrog stood side by side. One was in charge of setting fire, while the other was in charge of blocking the enemy. In an instant, the area within 200 meters in front of them was engulfed in a sea of flames. The moment the Tier 1 Dragonoid warriors charged into the sea of fire, they screamed in agony as they were burned by the magical flames. In addition to burning their bodies, the raging flames also entered their bodies through their eyes, ears, mouths, noses, and other vulnerable parts, burning their internal organs. Many Dragonoid warriors stumbled as they charged through the sea of fire. Before the Goblin Ripper could engage them, they had already fallen to the ground with flames spewing out of their eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Their muscular bodies were covered with burn marks. Only the Grade 2 Draconids could rely on the protection of the wind elemental energy around their bodies to charge through the terrifying sea of fire. However, as soon as they stepped out of the sea of flames and appeared on the other side, they ran into Tygol, who was brandishing metal chainsaws and drills. Bang, bang, bang. An ear-piercing sound of metal cutting came from afar. Every swing of the 1.5-meter-long metal chainsaw would leave many sparks on the Tier 2 Draconid's metal armor and tough draconic scales, and every time the madly whirling metal drill rose and fell, it would drill huge, bloody holes on the Draconid's body. Although the Draconids were extremely strong and had some of the elemental attributes of the Dragon Lords, they were still a little weak against a magic machine warrior arm to the teeth. No matter how strong the Draconids were, they were still afraid of a kitchen knife. No matter how strong the Draconids were, their equipment was worlds apart from the Goblin Ripper. Hence, the dozen or so Grade 2 Draconids were blocked by the Goblin Ripper at the edge of the sea of fire. Every time the Draconids pounced, they would be accompanied by large amounts of blood and flying limbs. The Goblin Ripper, which had just been repaired, was once again put to the test of battle. At almost every moment, there would be multiple heavy attacks landing on its sturdy metallic body. Every time the Dragonman's heavy warhammer fell, sparks would fly out from the Goblin Ripper's body. Inside, Tygol was shaken so badly that he felt dizzy and his ears couldn't hear anything else. Seeing that the situation was dire, Grim did not hesitate to change the direction of his cannon fire. Wild flame storm, meteor shower, and the terrifying volcano of Doomsday rained down on the Grade 2 Draconids, surrounding Tygol like a sea of lava. Fire-type mages truly lived up to their reputation as cannon fodder on the battlefield. Grim's unbridled attack immediately quelled the arrogance of the Draconids. The Dragonmen screamed miserably as they were burned. They dashed left and right in the sea of fire and could no longer gather into a group. However, no matter how tight Grimm's defense was, it could not stop the frightening number of Draconids. Just now, a group of Draconians had fallen after unleashing all their firepower, and before they could even catch their breath, another group of Draconians rushed through the sea of fire, roaring as they charged at Grimm and the others. The Goblin Ripper was gradually pushed to the side by the Draconid warriors, and a large number of Draconids brandished their war hammers and axes as they charged at Grimm and Balrog. Left with no choice, Grimm and Balrog could only use fireballs in their left hands and greatswords in their right to engage in melee combat. The entire battlefield instantly became chaotic and disorderly. Grimm and the others knew what was going on. The Tier 3 Thunder Dragon arms had the advantage of Dragon's might against the Draconid leader, and he also had the advantage in terms of size and strength. Victory was only a matter of time. Hence, Grimm could only do his best to stall the Draconids and wait for the Thunder Dragon to return and reinforce them. After all, there were only 4 Tier 2 Draconids on Grimm's side, while the Draconids had at least 20 to 30. In the sky above the cliff, Mary was shrouded in a bloody mist, weaving through the air at lightning speed. Every time she pounced, a wind elf let out a mournful wail before it died. Mary slaughtered more than 30 wind elves in a single breath, and the remaining wind elves could no longer endure the fear in their hearts. They cried out and fled. Mary did not chase after them. She flapped her wings high in the sky, looking down at the chaotic and bloody battlefield below. When she saw Grimm swinging his giant flaming greatsword and clumsily fighting against 3 Draconids, she immediately dove down without hesitation. The Dragonoid warrior that she had locked onto lifted his head, his 2 large and 2 small amber pupils staring unblinkingly at the red figure that was charging down from above. With a loud roar, the Dragonoid warrior swung his great axe at the Dragonoid warrior, who was surrounded by transparent green wind blades. A dull thud resounded. The Draconid warrior and Mary were sent flying at the same time. Mary's bat-winged body immediately spurted out a dark red arrow of blood, while the Draconid warrior's throat was gouged with 2 terrifying bloody holes. The Draconid warrior staggered 2 steps back, but he relied on his powerful physique and powerful regenerative abilities to regain his footing. Exchanging injuries for injuries. How could that skinny woman be a match for me? Unfortunately, before this thought could be completed in its dragon-shaped head, the blood-colored figure that was thrown away actually drew a strange arc and swooped down again. Damn it, when I chopped her with my axe just now, she should have fallen to the ground with serious injuries. Without much time to think, the heavily injured Draconid warrior swung his axe again, and the 2 figures of different sizes were sent flying again. This time, the Dragonoid warrior could no longer support his body. His 2 thick front legs gave way, and he fell to his knees. He threw his axe to the side and used his hands to cover the gaping hole in his throat, which was overflowing with blood. Unfortunately, no matter how hard it tried, the red blood flowed out from the gaps of its fingers like a stream, quickly gathering into a small lake in front of it. The Draconid warrior struggled to lift his head, his amber-like vertical pupils once again reflecting a slender figure that was rapidly approaching. Was she still human? She was a terrifying monster that could not be killed. As the crimson figure swept past its side, a huge head tumbled into the sky. Sensing the blood energy absorbed from the Draconid's body, Mary quickly mended the damage on her body while flapping her bat wings, darting through the chaotic battlefield. Her bloody hands were like razor-sharp daggers, quickly slicing through the throats, eyes, ears, armpits, and crotch of the Draconids. Each Draconid warrior that Mary attacked would not be able to hold back a muffled grunt. Their sweeping, slashing, and grabbing attacks all landed in the air. Mary was like a bloody specter, darting left and right among the Draconids, evading attacks one after another. She kept attacking the vulnerable spots of the Draconids with her scarlet hands that were imbued with bloody energy. With Mary's fragile body and the Draconids' imposing divine strength, she was like a glass figure that nimbly weaved through a herd of frenzied bulls. Any graze from the Draconids would leave them with broken bones and torn tendons. All Mary could do was push her extreme agility to the limit, darting between giant axes and war hammers at a terrifying speed that could not be captured by the naked eye, preventing the draconids from touching her. Grim, how long do we have to hold out? What are those witches doing? Why aren't they attacking? Mary roared at Grim as she slaughtered the draconids in a frenzy. However, before Grim had a chance to reply, a deafening dragon roar came from the depths of the palace. Witches, you're all grade 4 witches. Immediately after, the majestic palace behind Grim and the others shook violently and collapsed with a loud rumble. A huge dragon with a tail over 50 meters long soared into the sky, flapping its wings as it roared wildly. Damn it, the witches wouldn't let the dragon escape, would they? Grim's heart tightened. He looked up and was shocked to see a strange chain of light trailing behind the grade 4 draconid. One end of the chain was deeply embedded in the dragon's body, while the other end was firmly grasped in the hands of the Witch of Death, Thuna. With the existence of the chain of light, no matter how the blue sky wing flew in the sky, it could not fling Thuna off its body. Chapter 808. Shackles of War. Grim let out a long sigh as he raised his head. As a Tier 2 sorcerer, Grim had heard of this powerful warlock tool before. That light chain might not look like much, but it was a true level for sorcerer tool, and a terrifying, law-defying one at that. Enemies locked onto by the chain of light had no chance of escaping. If one did not kill the person holding the shackles of war, they would never be able to break free from the chain of light. Aretna. While Grim was silently admiring the battle between Tier 4 powerhouses, a deafening roar rang out not far away. Turning his head, Grim saw a dragon covered in blood, its body full of terrifying wounds. If not for its familiar body shape and incomplete azure scales, Grim would not have been able to recognize this Tier 3 thunder dragon. It roared loudly as it passed through the battle circle and rushed into the collapsed palace. It let out a crazy roar at the horrifying zombie dragon. Only then did Grim notice that the corpse dragon was using its thick, sharp claws to press down on a badly mangled dragon-shaped creature. It was unknown if the creature was dead or alive. Judging from the slender figure and the strange emerald dragon scales, it should be the Tier 3 little emerald female dragon, Aretna. However, she was no longer as beautiful as she used to be. Her appearance was as miserable as one could imagine. Of the two beautiful dragon horns on her head, the one on the left had already disappeared, and the one on the right was only half intact. Purple blood flowed out of the wounds, covering half of the dragon's face. Her slender body was covered in wounds of various sizes, each the size of a wash basin. Not a single scale could be seen on the surface of the wounds, revealing the bloody flesh, tendons, and white bones underneath. There was also a lingering aura of death lingering on the wounds. Under the corrosion of the aura of death, Aretna's flesh was rotting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Her skin turned gray, losing its vitality and vitality. Let go of Aretna. Hand over my Aretna. Arms, who was also injured, charged up to the Tier 4 zombie dragon and bellowed, "Release Aretna. Hand over my Aretna." Although the zombie dragon was heavily injured, it remained unfazed by a Tier 3 dragon's provocation. It used its thick claws to press down on the half-dead Aretna as it raised its head and glared at the eager thunder dragon. The battle in the sky was still intense and ferocious. The zombie dragon's ability to fly had obviously been crippled, and it could no longer return to the blue sky. After giving the matter some thought, Grim activated Flame Jump and appeared beside the thunder dragon. "Sir, according to the agreement I signed with Madame Suna, this Emerald WIRM is our target, so I'll have to trouble you to hand her over. Also, the battle on the ground is not over yet. To prevent these draconians from interfering with the two Lady Witches' plan, can you lend us a hand?" As the undead mount of the Tier 4 undead witch Suna, the zombie dragon undoubtedly possessed high intelligence. Faced with the request of a sorcerer of the same faction, it breathed out a cold mist and replied loudly, "Little sorcerer, Don't try to deceive the great artist with your little tricks. According to the agreement, this tier 3 little dragon is indeed yours. Here you go. As for the trash over there, that's your mission. Don't bother me. The zombie dragon raised its claw and tossed the little female emerald dragon at Grim. Grim paled. He nearly teleported away when he saw the massive dragon's body swooping towards him. Fortunately, the thunder dragon arms had been crouching by the side all this time. It leaped forward and caught Aratina with its thick front limbs and wings. After gently placing her on the ground, Arms immediately began to cleanse the dense aura of death that lingered around her body. He spat out a few well-timed, lightning dragon breaths on Aratina's body, thoroughly eliminating the dense aura of death. However, Arms could not do anything about the aura of death that had penetrated deep into the dragon's body. After all, the dragonkind had an outstanding anti-magic power and an enviably great recovery ability. Therefore, most of the low-grade healing medicines were almost ineffective on them. Only those high-grade magic medicines could possibly work on them. With the habits of the dragon race, how could they possibly carry recovery potions with them? After circling around the unconscious Aratina for a few times, Arms suddenly realized what was going on. He turned around and crawled in front of Grim, looking at him with an expression full of hope and hope. He did not look like a Tier 3 dragon. Instead, he looked more like a pug wagging its tail and begging for mercy. Cough. Love is truly blinding. Even a Tier 3 dragon can't escape from it. Grim cursed inwardly. He could not stand Arms' adorable way of begging, so he took out a small bottle filled with a green liquid and tossed it in his hand. Arms immediately recognized the green liquid that was filled with a strong aura of life. It was a bottle of moon water. Moon water was the holy water of the forest elves. It had a powerful recovery ability, and Aratina belonged to the forest dragon race. Moon water was perfect for her. Arms, who was crawling on the ground, widened his eyes even more. His thick tail, which was swinging back and forth behind him, swayed more and more happily. It was just that the terrifying might of the flying sand and stones was enough to make ordinary creatures unable to resist its flattery and flattery. Are you sure you want to cure her now? Grim tossed the bottle of potion in his hand and revealed a demonic smile. If she recovers now, are you sure you can subdue her? What if she still wants to save Blue Sky Wing and disturb the Two Witches plan? Do you think she'll be able to survive that? The series of questions caused Arms to fall to the ground. The Thunder Dragon's eyes welled up with tears as it lay on the ground, its tail motionless. Don't worry. With the physique of a dragon, she won't die from such injuries. Grim continued. As long as we end this battle quickly and bring her back to the Metal Fortress, healing her is just a matter of potion. But before that, don't you want to do something for me? The Tier 3 Thunder Dragon let out a low roar and got up from the ground. Ignoring the heavy injuries on its body, it charged into the Tier 2 Dragonkin warriors and started a massacre. With the Thunder Dragon as the main force, the pressure on Grim and the others immediately decreased by half. Without the pressure of survival, Grim and the others shifted their attention to how they could maximize their profits. In the previous battle, they were afraid that their attacks would not be vicious enough to withstand the assault of the Tier 2 Dragonoid warriors. Now, however, they changed their minds and began to carefully protect the Tier 2 Dragonoid warriors. Under the Thunder Dragon's unbridled attacks, one Tier 2 Dragonoid warrior after another fell to the ground, their limbs mangled and broken. Grim and the others immediately swarmed the Dragonoid warriors and knocked them unconscious. Then, they carefully moved them to a safe location. In just 15 minutes, the Thunder Dragon, with the help of Grim and the others, had successfully killed 39 Tier 2 Dragonoid warriors. When Grim and the others went to investigate, he was surprised to find that the Tier 3 Dragonoid chieftain was still alive. Hence, he captured it and moved it to a safe location. While they were busy, the Tier 4 Dragonoid warriors were engaged in a fierce battle in the sky. However, with their speed and strength, Grim and the others had no chance of watching or peeping at them. Moreover, These Tier 4 powerhouses could cross several kilometers with a single blink or flight. From the moment the battle began, they had changed locations over a dozen times, spanning hundreds of kilometers. Grimm had also secretly released several dozen apprentice windbreath monsters. Unfortunately, they could not keep up with the Dragonoid warriors' speed, or they were crushed by the shockwaves from the battle. This made Grimm realize that the Tier 4 battlefield was not something he could participate in right now. Ignoring the two witches and the Blue Sky Wings battle, Grimm dealt with most of the Dragonoid warriors and began to excavate the Tier 4 dragon nest. One after another, powerful stone puppets were summoned to move away the collapsed bricks and broken walls. Little by little, they began to dig deeper into the dragon lair. Grimm did not know what kind of benefits Grimm had promised the zombie dragon, but it was actually willing to participate in the excavation of the nest. In the process of digging, Grimm could deeply feel the wild and ferocious nature of the two witches of death. Most of the magic traps and mechanisms along the way had already been triggered, and most of the zombie dragon's injuries were due to these traps. It was thanks to the zombie dragon's ferocious charge that the two witches had been able to reach the Blue Sky Wings chamber. When they had entered the chamber, the Blue Sky Wing hadn't been fully prepared for battle. With the zombie dragon Arteist leading the way, Grimm and the others arrived at the Tier 4 dragon's chamber without any problems. When the overturned bricks and soil were cleared away, Grimm and the others were instantly lost in the dazzling brilliance. How shocking was the wealth of a Tier 4 dragon. In the past, Grimm might have had a rough idea of how much wealth it was, but after witnessing it for himself today, he had to admit that poverty could limit one's imagination. Grimm's eyes welled up with tears as he gazed at the sea of gold coins in the huge palace and the countless treasures that were hidden within. Chapter 809. The task of moving the Rank 4 dragon's treasure made Grimm extremely busy. The Blue Sky Wing Skrill had already been captured alive. In order to avoid any complications, the two Grade 4 witches did not stay at the Storm Fortress at all. Instead, they brought the dying dragon back to the Sorcerer World through the Metal Fortress. However, before they left, the two Rank 4 witches went to the dragon's lair again. In the blink of an eye, half of the treasures in the lair were gone. They only left half of the treasures for Grimm because he had worked so hard. Otherwise, Grimm would not have been able to get anything. Of course, before the two witches took action, the zombie dragon, Arteist, had already stuffed his stomach full of treasures. With his body size, he could not use any storage items, so he could only use his huge chest as a temporary storage cabinet. These items were his personal belongings after he went to battle. Even with Thuna's status as his master, she could not take them away so easily. Only after these masters had eaten their fill and returned satisfied did the remaining half of the dragon's treasure truly fall into Grimm's hands. Although the dragon's treasure had gone through many layers of exploitation, it was still rich in resources and extensive in content. Grimm's pockets were full and his belly round. The Metal Fortress was 20,000 kilometers away from Stormfort, even in a straight line. It was impossible for Grimm and the others to bring back all the spoils of war without missing a single one. The storage rings and pouches that they had put together were all filled to the brim, but the amount they brought back was not even a tenth of the dragon's treasure. Left with no choice, Grimm and the others could only abandon the worthless gold coins and the less valuable magic gems. Instead, they focused their search on the strange items. In the spirit of things that I don't understand are good things, Grimm spent 2 consecutive days in the treasure trove that was like a sea of gold coins. Using the powerful scanning function of the AI chip, he specifically searched for items with strong energy reactions or no energy reactions at all. With the eyes of a Rank 4 dragon, how could a Rank 4 dragon allow those ordinary weapons to enter its treasure trove? It was impossible even if he thought about it with his toes. Therefore, in the WRM's treasure trove, the more ordinary it looked, the more likely it was to be an unparalleled treasure that transcended the energy system. After all, the Storm Fortress was not a place to linger for long. A Tier 4 dragon also had plenty of descendants and subordinates. They were usually stationed in various places, and each had their own independent territory. But once he heard that something had happened to Boss Long too, he would definitely run over to investigate. Based on what Grimm knew, SKRYL was one of the 7 Tier 4 existences in the entire Lance Plane. It had over 100 dragon lords under its command. If those guys got wind of this and trapped Grimm and the others in the dragon lair, they would not have a good ending. Hence, after looting the Tier 4 dragon's treasury, Grimm and the others quietly left the Storm Fortress with a dozen or so dragonkin captives in tow. It was unknown if Grimm had done it intentionally or not, but he did not purposely clean up any survivors near the Storm Fortress. Naturally, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon would not have thought of this. Instead, it was overjoyed that it had recaptured Aratina and obtained a large number of rare treasures. It was only after they carefully returned to the Metal Fortress that they received the news from Gaz Ruvi. The entire Lance Plane was in an uproar. Previously, Grimm had been so unbridled in the Lance realm, abducting and slaughtering 3 Tier 2 and 4 Tier 1 dragons in one go. However, the commotion he had caused was minimal. There were at least 2,000 dragons in all of Lance, and no one would care about the loss of such a small number. No high-ranked dragon lord would travel tens of thousands of kilometers to a remote village to investigate and search for the culprit. However, when a famous Tier 4 dragon lord was murdered in its own lair, this horrifying incident immediately caused a tsunami of commotion throughout the entire Lance Plane. For a time, the dragons were in a frenzy. They flew out of their lairs and searched for the culprit. According to Gaz Ruvi's investigation, at least 3 Tier 4 dragon lords in the Lance Plane had issued an investigation order, requesting the dragon lords under them to investigate any outsiders in their territories. Once they discovered the culprit, they were to report it immediately. Such a huge commotion had clearly exceeded Grimm's expectations, and it could easily attract a huge crisis to the Metal Fortress. After hearing the news, even the Thunder Dragon Arms was a little restless. He carried Aeldina and the big and small bags of treasures he had plundered and hurried back to his territory. Grimm inwardly sneered when he saw Arms' flustered figure. If Arms refused to give up on his identity as a dragon lord, he would never be on Grimm's side. Using the commotion caused by this incident, Grimm was determined to subdue this unruly Tier 3 Thunder Dragon. In order to avoid being wiped out in one fell swoop, Grimm had a long discussion with Gaz Ruvi before he set off. Behind him, the magic machine core in the underground of the Metal Fortress had quietly moved to another territory. If the Metal Fortress was discovered and surrounded by the dragons, Grimm, Gaz Ruvi, and the others could cut off their tails to survive and continue developing their underground kingdom in another region. In any case, the ore veins under the Stoneclaw Mountains were almost depleted after years of mining. They needed a large-scale transfer. Therefore, Grimm was fully prepared for the imminent dragon's calamity. Unfortunately, while Grimm was prepared, the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon Arms was completely unprepared. To be honest, Arms was the one who started the war. The goal of the war seemed to be to avenge his love. However, Arms, who had been clamoring for vengeance, had never considered the impact that killing a Tier 4 Dragon Lord would have on him and the entire Lance Plane. Perhaps, deep down in his heart, he believed that this was an impossible task. Things had happened too fast, so fast that he had no time to think. In the first half of the war, his mind was filled with humiliation and hatred, and he could not think of anything else. In the second half of the war, he became a bystander, unable to control the course and direction of the war. When the dust settled, he was overjoyed by the return of his lover and the large amount of treasures. This series of events completely destroyed Arm's ability to think, and he stepped into the trap that Grimm had meticulously dug for him. Now that the oil pot was set up, the firewood was lit, and the stove was heated up, all that was left was to wait for the main character to jump into the fire and end his own life. Grimm was just an outsider after all. He could leave the Metal Fortress and run away after being beaten up. If he could not stay in Lance any longer, he could still go to the Sorcerer World. Arms, on the other hand, seemed to have no other way out other than Lance. Therefore, Grim led his men in the metal fortress and happily cleaned up the dragon's treasures while waiting for things to happen. Just as Grim expected, things happened very quickly. First of all, there were quite a number of survivors from the Storm Fortress who stated the enemy's scale and appearance in unison. Of course, the dragons were unfamiliar with outsiders like Grim, but the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon was very conspicuous. As members of the dragon race, all the colossal dragon lords abnormally hated those traitors and guides. With a Grade 3 Thunder Dragon as an obvious clue, it would be much easier to find out more about the Dragon Slayer. There were quite a number of Thunder Dragons in Lance, but only a handful of them could reach Grade 3. Even with their eyes closed, the dragons quickly turned their attention to the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms. Secondly, the Metal Fortress had caused a lot of trouble for the dragons in the area. This was especially true for the Grade 3 female fire dragon, Phileba Ahart. Not only had Arms shown himself in the battle against Ahart, but he had also openly sided with the invaders. This incident had caused quite a stir in the Stoneclaw Mountains back in the day. Now, these old grudges had been dug up. As a result, the Dragon Lords began to look at Arms, the young and promising Tier 3 Dragon Lord, with even more suspicion. While the dragons were planning to raid Arms's territory and capture him for interrogation, Arms had learned of the enemy's plan through the Thunder Dragon race's secret channels. Although the Thunder Dragon was a Tier 3 Dragon Lord, Arms had been terrified and restless when it had first received this news. Once it was brought to a high-level giant Dragon Lord and caught red-handed, it was highly likely that it would face the fate of having its title revoked and being imprisoned until its death. This was something it absolutely could not accept. After a long and painful period of contemplation, the Thunder Dragon Arms could only bring his wealth, the Emerald Dragon Beauty Aratina, and 5 low-tier green dragons to seek refuge with Grim. Originally, Aratina hated Grim to the core. She had even planned to leave Arms and explore Lance by herself. Unfortunately, this incident had become an earth-shattering storm. No one, not even a single dragon, could remain unscathed. The disappearance of Skryl, the Blue Sky Wing, was directly related to Aratina. If she had fallen into the hands of the dragons who had come to investigate or take revenge, her fate would not have been any better than Arms. Skryl had over 100 dragons under his command, and each of them would have been able to tear Aratina to pieces. Chapter 8:10. Lance Plain, Metal Fortress. The large amount of dragon treasures brought back from the Storm Fortress had already been sorted out and transported back to the Magus world. Just this raid alone would bring the Crimson family a huge fortune of 6 to 7 million gold coins. Apart from that, there was also a large number of mysterious items that were waiting to be appraised amongst the magic crystals, magic cores, magic materials, and strange treasures. Most of the magic equipment was not suitable for the sturdy bodies of the dragons, but it did not stop the dragons from collecting them like they were art pieces. With the picky eyes of the Grade 4 dragons, these magic equipment were at least Grade 2, and there was no lack of powerful Grade 3 and Grade 4 equipment. One had to know that even though these things were useless to the dragons, they could still be used by magi with some simple modifications. With such a large amount of premium and rare items, the quality of the equipment of the Crimson family magi would definitely be upgraded. After a rough inspection of the dragon treasures, Grim was pleasantly surprised to find that the materials needed to forge the other 3 parts of the Blazing Monarch set had already been prepared. As for the missing materials, they could be gathered in the Magus world by spending a bit more magic crystals. Hence, Grim did not hesitate to order the Crimson family's chief financial officer, Kirby, to gather the materials within a time limit. He also allocated 1 million magic crystals as the starting capital for the long list of materials. After this period of time, the goblin nobles in the Goblin Plain finally bowed their heads to the Crimson family. A few large nobles and tycoons fought to cooperate with the Magi. 5 of the most famous goblin merchant groups had already dispatched a team of 600 people to cross the Plain Gate and arrive at the legendary Sorcerer World. After surviving the difficult backlash, they resolutely headed to the various regions of the Magus world, setting up shops and goblin shops under the name of the Crimson Family. In the scattered Tower Forest region and the Northern Witches territory, the Crimson Family could still send a few acolytes to protect them. However, in the territories of the Silver Alliance and the Magus Association, the Goblin merchant groups could only rely on elite magic warriors to protect them. Fortunately, the Sorcerer world had its own complete and perfect operating system. It was not like those lower planes that would plunder and kill outsiders like them according to their whims. Moreover, the Crimson Family had already established a foothold in the scattered towers and the northern lands. Any magus or group that infringed on the Crimson Family's interests would not be able to escape retribution. Hence, as long as the No Merchant team didn't venture too deep into the chaotic regions, their safety was still guaranteed. One of the most important reasons why amethyst dragons were classified as gemstone dragons was that they could embed natural magical gems on their bodies. In this way, when fighting against enemies, they could freely activate the magical gems embedded on their bodies to bombard their enemies. Coupled with the amethyst dragon's strange scales and special stealth ability, it made it even more dangerous. Such a rare species of giant dragon was rarely seen, even in the dragon plane. But today, they had all left their comfortable nests and gathered here, silently making all sorts of preparations for the dragon's vengeance. Currently, there were 2 Tier 4 dragons and 16 Tier 3 dragons on this narrow peak. As for the ordinary Grade 2 dragons, they did not have the qualifications to stand here at all. They could only circle around the peak and wait for the orders of the high-tier dragon lords. The 2 Grade 4 dragons crouched high, silently listening to the Grade 3 broodmother, Philiba, explain the details of the invaders in the Stoneclaw Mountains. From when they appeared and established themselves here, to how they harassed the surrounding dragon lords, to how the fire dragons surrounded the metal fortress, and how they were ambushed by the Grade 3 Thunder Dragon arms. One incident after another, Philiba spoke until her saliva flew everywhere. It took her half a day to complete the entire story. When Philiba closed her mouth, the Grade 4 gold dragon's amber eyes shone with a golden radiance. It roared loudly. The truth is clear now. This is a group of invaders from the Magus world. They broke into the Lance Plain and killed many dragons. I am very sure that they are the culprits who invaded the Blue Sky Wing's nest. Toriel, it's time for us to take action. The Grade 4 amethyst dragon, Toriel, who was named, narrowed her eyes slightly, and a fierce smile appeared on her thin and narrow face. We are gathered here today to avenge the death of the Blue Sky Wing, Skrill, who was mysteriously murdered. From the evidence we have now, it is certain that Skrill's disappearance is related to these invading magi. So, there is no need to wait any longer. Today we will destroy the enemy's nest and kill all the magi who invaded our homeland. Move out! Move out! Following the command of the 2 Grade 4 dragon lords, the hundreds of dragons gathered near the peak stretched out their necks and roared in unison. The deafening roars of the dragons instantly reverberated through the undulating mountains of the Stoneclaw Mountains. Taking advantage of the agitation of the dragons soared into the sky, spreading their wings and flying towards the enemy's nest at the edge of the Stoneclaw Mountains. The dragons were attacking. The fruits of their previous harvest were sweet, but the suffering they had to endure now was even more bitter. The metal fortress, which had been emptied of most of the magic equipment and metal reserves, was still standing in the distance. Apart from tens of thousands of magic equipment, there were no other combatants in the empty fortress. The metal fortress was bound to fall sooner or later. At this time, there was no point in transferring the Scarlet Magi over to die with it. So, even after Grimm and Gazruvi moved most of the resources and metal reserves, they did not take the last batch of defending troops with them. If the dragons thought that the metal fortress was so easy to conquer, they might as well give it a try. Although failure was inevitable, and although the fall was only a matter of time, Gazruvi was confident that he could use the indestructible shell of the metal fortress and the tens of thousands of magic equipment to teach the invading dragons a painful and profound lesson. This was also the main reason why Grimm stayed behind to defend the metal fortress with Gazruvi. After 17 long hours of waiting, the dragons had finally arrived. Following a long and sonorous roar of the dragons, majestic and strong dragons pierced through the sky, burrowing out of the clouds and diving down towards the giant peak where the metal fortress was located. There was no shouting or verbal battle. As soon as the two sides met, it became a life-and-death situation. As a camouflage, the metal fortress had always been hidden within the giant peak. The belly of the mountain had been completely hollowed out, and only a thin part of the mountain barely maintained the appearance of a mountain. Chapter 8:11. At that moment, hundreds of openings suddenly opened on the outer surface of the metal fortress, which had just revealed part of its body, and black cannon muzzles extended from within. Then, under the horrified gazes of the dragons, powerful magic energy began to converge inside the cannon muzzles. In the next second, hundreds of energy beams shot out toward the group of dragons that were approaching them. For a moment, the dragons roared and roared as many of them coiled around to dodge, and the scene instantly descended into chaos. 3 rank 1 dragons couldn't dodge in time and were hit by 7 or 8 energy beams. Their wings were immediately damaged, and blood sprayed everywhere. They howled mournfully a few times before finally plummeting from the sky. More than a dozen metal gates suddenly opened near the foot of the metal fortress, and more than 100 3-meter-tall metal magical machines rushed out from within, pouncing towards the place where the giant dragon had fallen, looking like they were going to kill it all. How could the dragons sit back and watch as their compatriots were slaughtered at will? At that moment, another group of dragons braved the concentrated energy cannon fire and swooped down on a magic machine squad on the ground. Bam, bam, bam. Energy beams of different colors and attributes intertwined densely, weaving a dense energy net in the sky near the metal fortress. The diving dragons grunted repeatedly as they relied on their tough scales and odd Joa's magic resistance to force their way through the net of fire, and engaged in a chaotic battle with the magic machine warriors on the ground. Thump thump, one by one, the dragons landed on the ground in a wild manner, their thick dragon claws piercing through the chests of the magic machines. Their powerful wings and tails lashed out in all directions, smashing the magic machines one by one as their broken bodies flew straight into the air. Relying on their huge bodies and super strong defense alone, a rank 1 dragon was enough to easily crush a small squad of rank 1 metal magic machines. But in this kind of head-on battle, the dragons couldn't avoid taking damage. In particular, this batch of metal magic machines had been specially magically modified and strengthened by Gazruvi. Their basic weapons were no longer goblin guns that purely attacked with physical force, but magic energy guns that fired energy beams. Without being stingy with demonic energy, even Ajwa's magic-resistant giant dragon would find it hard to withstand 100 or so close-range energy rays. Immediately, 2 of the Tier 1 dragons were riddled with holes, while the remaining Tier 1 dragons groaned in pain as visible holes appeared on their bodies. Only the Tier 2 dragons could withstand such a ferocious barrage of attacks, charging into the ranks of demonic machines and slaughtering them. The terrifying dragon breath had an attack range of 100 meters and an area of almost 80 degrees. His tendons and bones clanged as he lashed out at the dragon tail, made of bone spikes that whistled through the air. It had a wingspan of 20 to 30 meters, and when it flapped, it could sweep through a large area. It bared its fangs, and with a single bite, it could even tear off a large portion of the metal pillar. Thick and powerful dragon claws that could carve a huge hole in the chest of a metal magical equipment. For a tyrannical giant dragon, any part of its body could become the sharpest weapon. They were like ferocious tigers charging into a flock of sheep. Every time they pounced, every time they turned, they could take down a large number of metal magical equipment. It was a pity that the dragon race's most powerful, vast dragon might, had no effect on the metal magical equipment. Otherwise, they would have an even greater advantage on the battlefield. But just as the Tier 2 dragons were slaughtering the metal magical equipment with ease, an earth-shattering roar rumbled through the sky like muffled thunder. Dodge, dodge? Dodge what? From that familiar voice, the dragons could naturally tell that it was the loud voice of the Tier 4 gold dragon, Stuart. But the problem was, dodge what? The Tier 2 dragons in the battlefield raised their heads, their sharp eyes immediately catching sight of a huge ball of light that had suddenly condensed on the metal fortress's wall. If the magically modified demonic machines were said to be energy rays, then the metal fortress's magic energy cannons were like energy beams. And now, the ball of light before the dragons was definitely several times thicker than an energy beam. Moreover, the ball of light also contained the violent, chaotic nature of the otherworld void. The ball of light devoured and absorbed all the light, making it look like a massive black sun. The violent mana contained within the ball of light was enough to make even dragons tremble in fear. Run, run! It was obvious that it was extraordinarily difficult for the metal fortress to produce such an attack. Due to the massive amount of energy gathered by the black sun, the surrounding void and light distorted visibly. If such an attack struck them, let alone the Tier 1 dragons, even Tier 2 dragons would instantly turn to ash. Their magic resistance would no longer matter. If it were a Tier 3 dragon, as long as they weren't in the Black Sun's core, they had a high chance of surviving. But if they were hit, no Tier 3 dragon could withstand such a chaos attribute attack with an energy intensity of 1,300 degrees. The Tier 2 dragons, who were slaughtering the dragons just a moment ago, were immediately frightened out of their wits. One by one, they flung away the demonic machines around them and planned to flap their wings and fly away. Unfortunately, how could the magical mechanical warriors, who were death warriors, allow them to come and go as they pleased? They pounced on them without a care for their own safety, grabbing their tails and hugging their thighs, forcefully holding back the group of giant dragons and preventing them from leaving. Just as the dragons were using all their strength to smash the magical machines into pieces, the metal fortress not far away suddenly shook, and the black sun crashed into the densest place of the dragons on the ground like a falling star. The next moment, the entire world fell silent. Without a sound, a black halo suddenly exploded on the battlefield, instantly engulfing all the dragons and demonic machines. There was no struggle, no screams. Wherever the black halo spread, even the dark and solid ground could not withstand the erosion of the violent energy, sinking more than 7 meters into the ground. The black sun first restrained itself, sucking in the energy particles and air around it like an old lady, compressing and stirring. Then it condensed into a finger and exploded with a shockwave of energy. The entire ground in the explosion zone was shaved bald by the violent shockwave. The soil on the surface was shoveled up and then crushed by the magical energy into tiny particles that were hard to see with the naked eye. All the debris was mixed together and smashed in all directions with an earth-shattering force. The metal fortress that was closest to the explosion zone was the first to bear the brunt of the shockwave. It trembled in fear. The 10,000-year-old mountain that was wrapped around the metal fortress trembled and collapsed layer by layer, revealing the golden, rock-solid metal shell underneath. As expected of a metal fortress, it stood tall despite the shockwave of such a powerful shockwave. However, it could still stand tall, while the dragons that had no one to rely on were in a miserable state. Needless to say, the dragons on the ground, regardless of whether they were Tier 1 or Tier 2, were instantly killed by the black halo. As for the dragons that were circling above the battlefield, they were blinded by the deafening explosion. Before they could spread their wings and soar into the sky, another shockwave of energy slammed into them. The dragons were swept up by the violent energy and charged around in the sky. Many of them had their bones broken by their companions, and their blood splattered all over the place. In an instant, the dragons that had gained the upper hand a moment ago were once again pulled back to the starting point. With just one attack, the metal fortress dealt a heavy blow to the attacking dragons, killing 7 and injuring 11. Of the 7 that died, 4 were Tier 2 dragons. The intensity of such a powerful attack was no weaker than the strength of a Tier 4 powerhouse. The 2 Tier 4 dragons that were watching the battle from the sky let out a long roar. Unexpected, truly unexpected. He could not sense the presence of any Tier 4 powerhouses within the fortress, yet was able to unleash the berserk nature of chaos magic to such an extent. Even they would have vomited 3 liters of blood if they were not careful, let alone a low-tiered dragon. At this moment, they could no longer remain at the back of the formation. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the 2 Tier 4 dragons flapped their massive wings and swooped down on the metal fortress. Since they were the ones leading the attack today, and the other side did not have a Tier 4 powerhouse, they would lose face if they allowed the dragons to suffer heavy losses. Hence, less than half an hour after the battle began, the 2 Tier 4 dragons were already charging into the fray. Each of the 2 Tier 4 dragons' breaths contained over 1,000 degrees of energy. Even the several-meter-thick metal walls, which had been infused with abundant mana, couldn't stop the breaths from penetrating the fortress's shell. Wherever the dragon breaths touched, the metal walls melted like snow under the scorching sun. In the blink of an eye, a 2-meter-wide, 4-meter-deep circular hole appeared on the metal fortress's outer wall. The surging dragon breaths blew into the metal fortress, rampaging through it and corroding everything it came into contact with. If it were a gnome or a sorcerer hiding behind the metal walls, they would have suffered heavy casualties. However, at this moment, aside from Grim, Gazruvi, and the clone Brain Grew were the only ones inside the metal fortress. They were hiding in the main hall of the metal fortress's core area. If the enemy did not break through the 3-4-meter-thick metal walls and pass through the layers of metal checkpoints, they would not be able to harm them at all. Under their feet was a makeshift teleportation circle. Once the battle reached its final moments, they would not want to die with this metal fortress that was destined to be abandoned. They would detonate the mana stored within the metal fortress and use the opportunity to escape. This was the feast that Grim and Gazruvi had planned for the dragons for a long time. As for whether the dragons would be lucky enough to enjoy it, that was not their concern. Chapter 8:12. The battle raged on. The outcome of the battle in the metal fortress had been decided from the very beginning. The only thing Grim and Gazlurvi could do was to crush the dragons in front of the metal fortress and make them pay for their recklessness and ignorance. 2 Tier 4 dragons led a dozen Tier 3 dragons to attack a metal fortress that had lost the protection of a wizard. It was an easy task. The magic cannons installed on the outer walls of the metal fortress were destroyed by the dragon's long-range dragon breath. After getting rid of the thorns, the dragons were able to approach the metal fortress and dismantle it with brute force. As he had anticipated the arrival of the dragons, Gazlurvi had already made great adjustments to the internal space of the metal fortress. All the warehouses, workshops, smelting furnaces, pipelines, and other facilities were dismantled. The metal scraps were not wasted either. They were all used to modify the internal structure of the metal fortress. At this time, the metal fortress had become a huge metal maze. Metal walls and layers of metal checkpoints divided the internal space into various combat spaces of various sizes. Tens of thousands of magic machines that had been activated beforehand were hidden among them, silently waiting for the arrival of the dragons. When the Tier 4 dragons used their terrifying dragon breath to open up a passage on the outer wall, some ungrateful dragons folded their wings and climbed into the passage. What welcomed them was, naturally, concentrated energy rays and crazy magic cannons. At this moment, Gazlurvi was no longer stingy with his mana and magic machines. The magic cannons fired fiercely, not even avoiding the positions of the magic machines. If they could kill a dragon at the cost of tens or even hundreds of magic machines, it would be worth it. In such a small and crowded area, it was not easy for the dragons to dodge the rain of bullets. The scales of the Tier 1 dragons could not withstand such a fierce attack. Only the Tier 2 dragons could withstand the enemy's attacks and destroy a few heavy firepower points. Therefore, after a few failed attempts, the dragons changed their previous habits. They began to use the Tier 2 dragons to attract the magic machine's firepower, while the Tier 1 dragons were responsible for destroying the firepower points. Relying on this method, the speed of their attacks was also much faster. In just an hour, the outer wall of the metal fortress was completely lost, and all the magic weapons began to retreat to the second line of defense. In this attack and defense, Gazruvi used his unique cunning to reap the greatest victory since the start of the battle. A Tier 3 dragon had died inside the metal fortress. Ordinary energy beams barely tickled these Tier 3 dragons. Even the mana cannons, which had an energy intensity of 100 to 200 degrees, couldn't threaten the Tier 3 dragons. Hence, in this head-on battle, many of the Tier 3 dragons, relying on their high HP and defense, began to play the role of tanks. Meanwhile, Gazruvi had taken advantage of their arrogance to suppress the other routes while relaxing the intensity of the magic fire in one of the routes. With this, he had successfully lured a Tier 3 dragon into the midst of a swarm of magic weapons. In all honesty, even if he piled up a large number of Tier 1 magic tools, it would still be very difficult to kill this Tier 3 dragon. However, the combination of a Tier 1 magic machine swarm and magic cannons was more than enough. No matter what, the arrogant dragons had never imagined that their enemy could be so cruel as to release such a powerful black sun within their own defensive line. By the time the Tier 3 dragon sensed the rapidly gathering chaos energy and tried to break out of the encirclement, its escape route had already been blocked by the swarm of magic weapons. Bang, after a dull, hoarse sound, the Tier 3 dragon in the center of the black sun raised its neck and let out a long roar. Then, it melted like a candle in a furnace. After the violent chaos energy exploded in such a narrow area, the destructive effect was even more obvious. The dragons that were trapped in the swarm of magic weapons and could not escape in time were all melted into a black, viscous liquid along with the magic weapons around them. The molten iron and flesh mixed together, and before they could cool down, they were completely vaporized by the energy shockwave that erupted afterward. The ferocious and violent chaos energy repeatedly collided and surged inside the metal fortress, causing even more terrifying destructive power. The dragons that coiled around the metal fortress only felt the huge metal mountain tremble violently. The originally indestructible outer wall actually melted like hot wax and softened. As for the more than 20 dragons that were trapped in the fortress, their life force instantly disappeared. They could no longer feel the presence of their souls. It was obvious that the black sun that exploded inside the fortress not only destroyed the majestic bodies of the dragons, but also their souls. From now on, the beautiful sky of the Lance realm would forever lose these legendary, majestic figures. Looking at the violent magical energy that instantly destroyed more than half of the metal fortress, the eyes of the dragons froze. They stared blankly in the sky, silently looking down at the desolate battlefield that was emitting thick black smoke. All thoughts in their minds had already flown away. Their hearts were filled with emptiness, and they did not know what to do or what expression to use to express their current feelings. Below them, where the metal fortress used to be, was an indescribably tragic scene. Trees, soil, and even the metal walls were all blown away. The exposed black rock surface was covered in bits of flesh and broken limbs. Purplish-black dragon blood flowed out of piles of oddly shaped ruins, converging into a stream that slowly flowed towards the huge pit at the center of the explosion. Broken dragon corpses and broken pieces of magical equipment were mixed together, like a still abstract painting. Anyone who looked at it from afar would be horrified. Only at the edge of the area far from the center of the explosion did the dragons see a few slowly wriggling, familiar figures. A Tier 3 dragon and a Tier 2 dragon. Although they had survived, Their once elegant and beautiful bodies were now densely covered in bloody holes of various sizes. They were filled with broken and sharp metal shards, and a slight movement would cause large amounts of dragon blood to splatter out. A few dragons hurriedly let out long cries and dove down, trying their best to save their two lucky companions. The remaining dragons' eyes were bloodshot as they let out earth-shattering roars. They began to frantically use their dragon's breath to clean up the remnants of the metal fortress. Most of the magical machinery had been destroyed by the shockwave of the explosion. Only a small number of them rushed out of the ruins and continued to attack the dragons with sizzling energy rays. Soon, they were also destroyed by the dragon's breath. The entire battlefield fell into silence once again. The dragons had won. They had won the battle in a way that they were not willing to accept. The dragons were whimpering in another region 17,000 kilometers away from the Stoneclaw Mountains. In a dark and deep cave, the dazzling light of the temporary teleportation formation illuminated every inch of the space. When the white light began to slowly dissipate, Grim, Gazruvi, and the clone Brain Gru appeared in the teleportation formation. The Scarlet Magi, who were waiting at the front of the formation, stepped forward and bowed. Just now, they had watched the heroic final battle of the Metal Fortress through the synchronized transmission of magical messages. Throughout the entire process, Grim and Gazruvi did not personally take action. They did not even show their faces. However, they had relied on the Metal Fortress's strange combat techniques to leave such a terrifying wound on the powerful dragons. This was clearly beyond the abilities and methods of a normal magus. There was no right or wrong, and it had nothing to do with the methods used. Any magus with such power deserved the respect they deserved. After the two Scarlet Magi greeted the Tier 3 Thunder Dragon, Arms, who was in human form, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward to greet Grim. According to their previous agreement, Grim had fulfilled his promise. Now, Arms could be considered as Grim's contracted partner. In terms of status, the two seemed to be on equal footing. However, considering that Arms was currently under Grim's protection, there was an invisible difference in their statuses. Forcing a Tier 3 dragon to lower its head to a Tier 2 sorcerer was a disgrace that Arms couldn't let go of. However, Grim did not mind at all. It was always difficult to lower one's head for the first time. By the time Grim and Arms got used to it, their statuses would have undergone earth-shattering changes. Through today's battle, Grim had openly displayed his strength to Arms, Valentina, and the arrogant green dragons. The Battle of the Metal Fortress had once again proven that Grim and the Crimson family possessed the strength to slay Tier 3 dragons and fend off hordes of dragons. This was the only reason Arms was willing to lower his head to Grim. Arms, do you know the two Tier 4 dragons that attacked the Metal Fortress today? Who are they? Grim asked calmly as he stepped out of the teleportation formation and strode towards the temporary hall. It's Stuart, the Golden Dragon, and Toriel, the Amethyst Dragon. They're two of Lance's 7 Tier 4 Great Lords. Arms hesitantly revealed everything he knew as he followed Grim. Good, very good, Grim said bitterly. Gazlervi, immediately send their information and intelligence to Alice and see which leader is interested in them. Oof. Since they destroyed my castle, I'll make them pay with their lives and freedom. Grim's tone was so fierce that even Arms could not help but shudder. This was a group of Tier 4 dragons they were talking about. A puny Tier 2 magus actually dared to declare the fates of Tier 4 dragons in such a tone. This shocked Arms, a Tier 3 dragon, to no end. Chapter 8:13. The battle at the Stoneclaw Mountains had brought indescribable pain to the dragons. The Magi who had invaded Lance had been despicable, and their cruel methods had left a lingering fear in the hearts of the dragons. After some calculations, the number of dragon lords that had died at the Stoneclaw Mountains was as high as 34, almost a third of the total number of dragons. The result of their battle, on the other hand, was a horrifying graveyard made of molten iron and dragon corpses that had almost half collapsed, as the broken dragon corpses had been completely submerged by the solidified molten iron. Trying to break open the metal coffin and find the corpses of the dead dragons had become a sorrowful mission that they would never be able to complete. Left with no choice, the two great dragon lords could only dig up the deep pit beneath the metal fort, burying the fort and the iron coffin together. They then sent a large number of dragon followers to guard the area day and night. The furious dragons searched the entire metal fort, but could not find a whereabouts of the Magi. This also meant that after this group of detestable sorcerers had bitten off the dragons, they had successfully escaped. As for whether they had escaped back to the Magus world or remained in Lance, no one knew. However, when they thought about the possibility of such a group of evil people hiding around them, all the dragon lords felt their hair stand on end. They made a mental note to clean up the area around their territories when they returned. The dragons stayed in the Stoneclaw Mountains for 2 months, searching every mountain range and every inch of land. However, they could not find any traces of the Magi. They each had their own territories and citizens, and were even more worried that leaving their nests for too long would give rise to thieves who would covet their wealth. Hence, from the 3rd month onwards, some of the dragons left the Stoneclaw Mountains one after another, returning to their territories. Although a Tier 4 Great Lord possessed immense authority and prestige, it couldn't enslave its subordinates endlessly. Hence, after a few fruitless searches, the 2 great dragons could only roar and soar into the sky, leaving with their respective subordinates. As the great dragon lords, their territories were tens of thousands of miles away from here. If not for the fact that they wanted to avenge Skrill, who was also a Grade 4 great dragon, they would not have come all the way here, given their laziness. Now that they had left, it meant that there were no longer any Grade 4 great dragons in this area. Once the Magi returned, the remaining Grade 1, 2, and 3 great dragons could only pray for their own good. Not to mention the fact that the dragon lords were all hiding in their nests and trembling in fear. Just the internal affairs of the family were enough to keep Grimm busy and anxious. The mountain range that Gaz RWE had chosen was also a region with a large reserve of metal ores. The space in the mountain that had just been dug out was only 1% the size of the original metal fortress. Moreover, the metal ingots that had been smuggled in had been gathered together by Gaz Ruvi. Day and night, the magical energy of the magic furnace had infected them. Now, Gaz Ruvi was in control of the super magic furnace, and his subbrain, Gru, was in control of a new, smaller magic furnace. This was Grimm's reward for Gaz Ruvi's recent efforts. With these 2 magical furnaces continuously transmitting magical energy day and night, a small-scale metal fortress was already beginning to take shape. However, in order to prevent the sound of mining from being heard by the outside world, Gaz RWE had to reduce the size and number of mining machines. In order to prevent the native tribes from noticing the black smoke produced during large-scale metal smelting, the cunning Gaz RW even sent a team of magic machines to the depths of the mountains to trigger an earth-shattering volcanic eruption. Then, with the rapid changes in the Earth's crust, he purposefully cleared out all the intelligent races near the camp. Judging from the current situation, it would take at least 7 months for Gaz RWE to restore the camp to the size of the original metal fortress. There was no other way. The current Lance Plain was in a state of panic, and any abnormalities in the area would attract the attention of many great dragon followers. If these Draconians were chased away or killed, they would instantly attract the Draconians' patrols or the Dragon Lord's personal inspection. While the new metal fortress was still under construction, Grimm brought his dragon subordinates back to the wizard world. Originally, Grimm planned to temporarily place these dragons under his protection in the Goblin Plain, but they were unwilling to do so. However, it was a low magic plane, and the magical energy there was so thin that it was heartbreaking. The dragons immediately rejected him. Left with no choice, Grimm brought them back to the wizard world and placed them in batches at the Flame Monarch and the White Tower. With the Crimson family's wealth, they could not afford to build a huge cliff for these dragons. Thus, they could only be kept near the two wizards' pagodas. As long as they did not fly out of the wizard's pagoda and had the Crimson family's magical emblem on them, they would not be captured by the wizards of other families. However, the Emerald Dragon Beauty, Artina, and the Lightning Dragon Arms seem to have some sort of relationship. The two level 3 dragons actually chose to live separately. Aratina led the 7 green dragons and settled in a forest 70 miles northeast of the White Tower. They live a life of listening to orders, but not listening to orders. The Lightning Dragon Arm stayed near the Flame Monarch for the time being, also living in seclusion. The arrival of these dragons had undoubtedly increased the reputation of the Crimson family. Many families and wizards who were eager to obtain the resources of the dragons came to the Crimson family's territory to inquire about the price of the dragons. After all, even though the dragons were not the strongest among the wild magical beasts, they were definitely the most famous and eye-catching. Feeling the craze, even Grimm could not help but consider whether he should make the dragons the main brand of the Crimson family. Just as Grimm was silently racking his brains for the family's business, the war between the Crimson family and the Kamara family was still ongoing. As the Crimson family only had 2 wizards' pagodas, they did not have any other properties or territories that could be attacked. Thus, the Kamara family could only bitterly choose to defend. On the other hand, the Crimson family sent out a powerful level 2 worm lich, Bliss, who could form an army by himself, as well as a few blood elves. Under their all-pervasive attacks, all of the Kamara family's territories, manors, towns, and resource points were plundered many times. Even the wizards guarding the resource points were killed. But every time the Kamara family wanted to retaliate, they could not catch up to the Worm Lich and the vampires. Even if they sent out the level 2 or 3 powerhouses of the family, they could only kill a few wizard apprentices sent by the Crimson family. But if they could kill 10, the Worm Lich could kill 100. Compared to Bliss, who had countless worm clones, the Kamara family's wizards' killing methods were too conservative and simple. Misty Valley, 30 miles west of Stonefeld City, there was a long and narrow valley shrouded in thick fog all year round. It was said that there was a strange magical creature in the valley that could breathe clouds and mist. It had occupied this area as its nest. As long as no living person entered to disturb its slumber, it would never wake up. And once it woke up, it would not be full without devouring at least 10 humans. Similar rumors spread in the nearby villages and towns, causing countless merchants and commoners to tremble in fear at the mention of this name. Of course, this was only the information commoners knew. Only a few of the nobles in Stonefeld City knew the real inside story. There were no magical creatures in the Misty Valley. This was just a level 1 resource point that the Kamara family had secretly set up. As for the laughable rumors, they were spread by the nobles to prevent ignorant commoners from disturbing the peace of the resource point. Of course, any resource point would have a powerful spell formation protecting it, with wizards and acolytes stationed there for a long period of time. And Span was one of the many wizard apprentices in the Misty Valley. Span was 15 years old this year, an intermediate acolyte with ordinary qualifications and talent. His father was an ordinary tailor in Stonefeld City, and his mother was only a kitchen maid who worked as a maid in a noble mansion. His lowly parents did not give him a handsome face, nor did they give him outstanding talent. But when he was 7 years old, a magus from the Kamara family discovered his elemental talent and brought him to the Misty Valley. His life changed drastically. In the Misty Valley, he was perhaps just an ordinary intermediate acolyte, but in the eyes of the nobles in Stonefeld City, he was a local who had walked out and was worth investing in. From the moment he entered the Misty Valley, his father became a small official under the city lord's mansion and was given a small villa with 2 floors and a garden. His mother, on the other hand, was freed from her daily chores and became a noble woman who could order her maids around. The changes in the family were naturally seen by Span, and it made him mature and sophisticated at a young age. In his second year in the Misty Valley, he became a beginner acolyte, and in his 4th year, he became an intermediate acolyte. Now, deeply troubled by his talent, he could not wait to become a high-level acolyte. As an acolyte of the Kamara family stationed in the Misty Valley, Span's daily task was to patrol the few gardens at the edge of the valley. The soul-eating flowers and killer trees were all low-level magic plants, and they did not pose much of a threat to an acolyte like him, but they were still extremely dangerous to ordinary people who wandered in by mistake. According to the agreement between the family and the nobles in Stonefeld City, the city would send a batch of death row prisoners to feed these magic plants every month. Chapter 814. Span had a very strange dream. In the dream, he seemed to have become a strange beetle, only the size of a fingernail, quickly crawling on the tall green grass that reached the clouds. It bypassed a large obstructing boulder, soil particle, climbed over a heavenly tree, fire stick, and continuously climbed up the lofty mountain in front of it. Finally, after experiencing untold hardships, trekking over thousands of mountains and rivers, and passing through all kinds of tests, it arrived at a pitch-black cave with a viscous liquid slowly flowing out. Without the slightest hesitation, it drilled into the cave and disappeared into the pitch-black space in an instant. Span shuddered and crawled up from the grass. Rubbing his aching and dizzy head, he couldn't understand why he had suddenly fallen asleep here. Also, the little bug in the dream was so real that Span couldn't help but wipe the saliva from the corner of his mouth and smack his tongue. It seemed like there really was a nauseating stench. Could it be that he was controlled by some hidden monster in the fog canyon? Otherwise, how could he have such a ridiculous daydream? Span shook his head, intending to use all his strength to sense the abnormality in his body. However, he was alarmed by the sound of wheels on the forest path not far away. The carriage transporting the condemned prisoners had arrived. It was time to find a chance to teach these damned, unpunctual mortals a lesson. With an irrepressible rage, Span strode forward to meet the other party. Just as Span and the black prison carriage crossed paths, a figure shrouded in a black robe suddenly turned around on the distant cliff of the canyon. Through the dense fog and the lush foliage of the trees, it cast its gaze on this intermediate acolyte from afar. Under the shadow of the drooping hood, densely packed, dark green, compound eyes flickered with a strange radiance that was hard for outsiders to comprehend. Little darlings, be at ease and lie low. When the fruit has grown to its sweetest, remember to bring their souls, flesh, and spiritual force back to me. Kakik. Hearing that low and hoarse insect hiss, it was the strange voice of the insect Lich Bliss. In this Kamara family's resource point, there was a rank 1 Magus and 37 acolytes. With Wormwitch Blitz's current strength, it would be a piece of cake for him to kill them. But it was rare to encounter such excellent puppet hosts. How could Bliss bear to slaughter them so easily? It had to be known that in the scattered Pagoda Forest region, where the laws of Magi were strict, if a variant Magus like him were to go on a killing spree, it would easily attract the interference of high-ranked Magi. Only in a war between Magi like this could both sides be unscrupulous and not have to worry about high-grade Magi getting involved. This resource point was one of Blitz's targets. Of course, sending out the bug army to wipe them all out in one fell swoop and plunder all the resources was no longer enough to pique Blitz's interest. Spreading his newly bred heart eating insects in the Misty Canyon was the main goal of his trip. Even the 2 Tier 1 sorcerers were not spared. All the sorcerers and acolytes in the Fog Canyon were invaded by the heart-eating bugs. With their strength, if they didn't use some special witchcraft or methods, they wouldn't be able to detect the existence of the heart-eating bugs. As long as the heart-eating bugs had a chance to grow, everything they had would become a stepping stone for Blitz's development. Ever since he advanced to Tier 2, developing and strengthening himself had become the only thing the worm which Blitz cared about. This family war was undoubtedly the best stage for him to kill and harvest to his heart's content. He needed the other party's soul, he needed the other party's flesh, and he needed the mental energy that they had painstakingly grown using his soul to sense that all the living beings in the fog canyon had been taken over by the heart-eating bugs. Blitz turned to leave. No rush, no rush. He was not in a rush to harvest these delicious fruits that needed to be watered. There was still a long way to go in this war. He had plenty of time to wait for these cute little bugs to bring back everything the enemy had. Grim was very busy. Other than the affairs of the family, there was still a large batch of captives waiting for him to deal with in the Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda. In the sealed room on the second level of the Wizard's Pagoda, other than the level 3 vampire he had captured during the previous war, there was another powerful level 3 draconian prisoner of war. In the prison on the first level of the Wizard's Pagoda, there were 11 level 2 draconians imprisoned. These draconians were all solid, and it would be extremely difficult to force them to submit. Furthermore, the Crimson family lacked powerful necromancers or people skilled in the processing of wizard beasts. It was difficult to turn them into powerful undead creatures or wizard beasts. Thus, after discussing with Gargamel, Meryl, and Alice, Grim could only put them up for sale in Cabby's Gnome Merchant Association. A level 2 draconian, even if it was just a live test subject, would fetch a hefty price. Thus, Grim sold all of the level 2 draconians at 5,000 magic crystals each, while the level 3 draconian was sold at 17,000 magic crystals. Other than that, the Gnome Merchant Association also had a large batch of dragon brand high-level materials, such as dragon crystals, dragon brains, dragon bones, dragon horns, dragon teeth, dragon tendons, dragon eyes, dragon spine fluid, dragon blood, dragon scales, and a rare material targeted at special hobbyists, dragon penis. There were all sorts of materials from level 1 to level 2, and it was a dazzling sight. As the Crimson family's leader, Grim was still a grade 2 magus. No matter how one looked at it, this was too low. It was precisely because Grim's grade was too low that the Crimson family was in a state of unrest. The grade 3 Thunder Dragon and Emerald Dragon Lady were restless above, and the grade 2 Magi were hot on their heels. If Grim, as the leader, did not have power that could make others believe in him and fear him, his position would not be stable. This was a situation that most Magus families faced. The leader of all wizard families was the strongest one, not the wisest or the wisest one. Why was this so? The reason was simple. The cohesiveness that maintained the family's rule was not respect for the wise, nor was it intelligence. Instead, it was the bloodthirsty power and terrifying methods that could crush everything. With power that could crush everything, there would naturally be smart scholars and wise people to share the burden, as well as shrewd managers to take care of everything. However, if the leader was weaker than his subordinates, then the organization would always be restless and suspicious. At that time, just the internal strife and division of the organization would cause it to collapse and disappear. Hence, with Alice's hints, Grim began to treat the matter of raising his grade 3 Magus family as the most important matter. Chip, display my latest stats. Beep. Body scan completed. Latest stats are as follows. Grim, high grade 2. Profession, Elemental Magus, Fire Specialization. Stats, Strength 13 plus 1, 20. Vitality 15, 21. Agility 11, 9. Spirit 28 plus 1, 30. Note, stats after transformation are in brackets. Profession skills, Body of Flames, Balrog, Transformation. With the end of his trip to the Fire Elemental Plane, Grim's basic strength had improved by leaps and bounds. In less than 30 years, he had already risen to high grade 2, and was only a small step away from the peak. His innate fire talent had also reached the peak, and there was no way for him to improve in the short term. Chapter 815. AI. Chip, search for the requirements to advance to rank 3. Beep. Command accepted. Beginning to search database. Accompanied by a strange buzzing sound, the AI chip quickly sent back the information that Grim needed. Beep. According to the contents of the database and the host's current stats, there are 2 requirements for host to advance to rank 3. First, spiritual force must reach 29 points. This is the requirement to advance to rank 3. Second, obtain the necessary knowledge and resources to advance to rank 3. Currently, the host still lacks the high-ranked applications of spiritual force, the necessary knowledge of elemental conversion, a self-constructed energy model, and the characteristics of high-ranked fire elemental magic. As for resources, I've attached a detailed list. With the AI chip's projection in the depths of his mind, a list of 63 items to advance to rank 3 slowly unfolded. Grimm scanned the list and discovered the names of many rare fire elemental materials, many of which were similar to the flame essence. With the Magus world's wealth of plundering countless secondary planes, any kind of resource could be bought. The only difference was the amount of magic crystals needed. Grimm made a simple calculation. He only needed about 1,400,000 magic crystals to make up for the missing resources and materials. What really gave him a headache was the lack of knowledge. Most large Magus families and organizations treated high-ranked knowledge as their most important assets and kept it a secret. They might exchange a few resources, but they were very secretive about the knowledge they possessed. Without signing the necessary contracts, there was no way he could come into contact with such knowledge. Grimm had been slaughtering his way through the years, and the resources he had plundered could be said to be overflowing with oil. However, he had never made any progress in plundering knowledge. The knowledge that the AI chip had listed were all high-ranked knowledge. Unless Grimm was willing to abandon the Crimson family and join a large Magus organization, there was no way he could come into contact with such knowledge. Faced with such a problem, Grimm's first thought was of Alice, who was far away in the north. Grimm quickly contacted Alice through the long-distance communication between the two wizards' pagodas. After listening to Grimm's list of knowledge, Alice could not help but furrow her brows. The Tower of Destiny's library does have advanced applications of spiritual power and advanced characteristics of fire elements, but I don't have any recollection of the other two. After all, the Tower of Destiny has been silent for over 1,000 years, and the internal resources and knowledge reserves are severely lacking. If you want to obtain the remaining 2 types of knowledge, you might really have to deal with those witch leaders. After saying that, Alice thought for a moment and said, "I'll think of something for you. He might even be able to gain something from the Witch of Death. Just wait for my news." Immediately after, the long-distance connection with Alice was directly cut off. Although Grimm's heart was burning with passion, he knew that this kind of thing could not be rushed. Moreover, his spiritual power was only at 28 points, which was 1 point away from the peak of 29 points. Don't underestimate this small gap. With Grimm's current speed of meditation and mental strength, it would be impossible for him to achieve this without a few years of effort. Thus, after entrusting the task of finding the advanced knowledge to Alice, Grimm placed more attention on the creation of the remaining 3 pieces of the Blazing Flame Monarch. After plundering the level 4 giant dragon's nest, he had gathered most of the main materials needed to create the Blazing Flame Monarch. He had also gathered most of the remaining consumable materials through the Gnome Cabbie. Thus, Grimm took this rare opportunity to stay in the Wizard's Pagoda and silently prepare for the 3rd piece of the set. For the 3rd piece, Grimm chose the core component of the Blazing Flame Monarch, the Burning Corona. Moreover, the flame barrier of the Burning Corona could be fused with Grimm's own flame barrier, increasing the level of the damage of the flames. This was extremely beneficial to Grimm's large-scale control of the battlefield. Having experienced the creation of so many magic puppets, it was of great help to Grimm in creating wizard weapons. With the help of the AI chip, the chances of failure were unbelievably low. In just 37 days, Grimm successfully created the 3rd piece of the Blazing Flame Monarch set that belonged solely to him. From its appearance, the crown looked like a ball of slowly flowing flames. It was forged from fire essence iron into the shape of a crown, with strange metallic threads intertwining around it to form densely packed fire runes. The fire essence diamond embedded in the crown was not only as beautiful as a dream, but also had the miraculous effect of increasing the power of fire spells. When Grimm wore the burning corona on his head, the three pieces of the set immediately resonated with his soul, and a faint red halo appeared on the surface of his body. Not only could this halo increase Grimm's resistance to fire, it could also be ejected from his body like a flame barrier, forming a giant membrane of light that was 100 meters in diameter. Any life or matter that was caught in the membrane would have to bear the damage of the magic flames at all times. Grimm closed his eyes and made some calculations. After the flame barrier of the burning corona fused with the flame barrier he had cast, the damage of the magic flames would be increased to 115 points per second. Grimm had only reached this level of damage when he was at the intermediate grade 1 magus. However, intermediate grade 1 magus would need 3 to 5 seconds to cast a spell that dealt 115 points of damage. Grimm's flame barrier, on the other hand, covered all his enemies passively. He could also cast spells while the flame barrier burned his enemies. This meant that any enemy that entered Grimm's flame barrier would have to bear the continuous attacks of an intermediate grade 1 magus at all times. If the enemy's defensive spells could not withstand such powerful attacks, Grimm would not even need to take action. The enemy would be burnt into a pile of charcoal by the magic flames. In the future, if he was surrounded by a large group of intermediate grade 1 magi, Grimm only needed to use Flame Leap to rush into the crowd and activate the flame barrier. In less than 5 seconds, the entire world would be peaceful. After activating the third piece of the Blazing Flame Monarch set, Grimm obtained a new set ability. The spiritual force consumption of fire spells was halved. This was also a very practical combat ability. It could double Grimm's firepower on the battlefield, and it could also be used on elemental puppets. This also meant that Grimm's current spiritual force could support 2 intermediate grade 2 magic puppets at the same time in a battle. If he added himself into the mix, it would be equivalent to 3 peak grade 2 fire creatures appearing on the battlefield at the same time. Among intermediate grade 2 magi of the same level, who could withstand the attacks of 3 terrifying flame demons at the same time? Grimm couldn't hold back his excitement when he thought of the tragic scene of fireballs and lava bursting. Fire magi would always be the focus of attention on the battlefield. Only on the battlefield would they be able to unleash their destructive might. Perhaps it was due to the butterfly effect, but just as Grimm was fantasizing about his majestic figure on the battlefield, Alice personally brought 2 books to the Blazing Flame Monarch's Wizard's Pagoda, bringing him a piece of shocking news. In consideration of their previous good cooperation, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, had agreed to Alice's request and lent Grimm the 2 knowledge that he urgently needed to advance. However, in return, Alice had to participate in the declaration of war issued by the Witches of Death. Declaration of war? Seeing that Grimm was confused, Alice had no choice but to patiently explain. Not long ago, a secondary plane occupied by the Witches of Death had been attacked by the beast gods of the world of gods. The entire plane had been destroyed, and even the intermediate grade 3, which stationed there, had not been able to escape in time. She had died at the hands of the invading beast gods. This was undoubtedly a declaration of war for the Witches of Death. Hence, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, sternly issued a declaration of war at the Witch Council, threatening to take revenge on the beast gods. She also called on the other witch factions to send troops to fight alongside her. It was under such circumstances that Thuna had agreed to Alice's request. However, she had also requested that Alice actively respond to her declaration of war. This also meant that Alice had to organize a sufficiently powerful expeditionary force to follow the Witches of Death into another world and fight for the glory and dignity of the Witches of the North. The Witches of Destiny led by Alice had just gone through a cruel, bloody battle in the Farum Plain, and the number of official witches had been reduced to 4. Without a few decades of recuperation, it would be difficult for them to recover to their original numbers. With such a number of witches, it would be difficult for them to carry out many internal witchcraft activities, let alone fight in another world. Hence, If Grimm wanted to obtain the remaining two knowledge, he could only build a powerful combat force and use the name of the Witches of Destiny to participate in the Witches of Death's expedition to another world. Grimm was silent. After thinking for a full 3 days and weighing the pros and cons of various information, Grimm finally decided to participate in the Witches of Death's expedition to another world. Grimm had also put in a lot of effort in choosing the members to participate in this war. Now that the Crimson family was on the rise, they had spread their influence to the scattered forest of towers in the north. They needed high-ranked magi to be stationed everywhere. It was impossible for Grimm to summon all the powerful wizards in the family like he did before. If he did this, the Blazing Flame Monarch and the White Tower would most likely be invaded by unknown enemies, while the Crimson family's strength was lacking. Chapter 8:16. After a period of consideration, Grimm came up with the following list. Rank 3, Lightning Dragon Arms Level 2. Grimm, Alice, Mary, Tigula grew. Rank 1, Wind Wizard Desira, Medusa, Berserk Witch Sophia, and 4 new Magi. Magic Machinery Team. 100 Shield Guardians, 300 Magic Archers, 30 Magic Chariots, 200 Eyeball Mechs, 10 Gnome Engineers, 50 Gnome Technicians. This was all the manpower the Crimson family could muster. Compared to the team that had entered the Fairn Plain, this team was stronger. In comparison, even though the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, had already declared war, the real battle would still drag on for half a year. There was no helping it. Crossing plains to attack a plane that was guarded by another powerful race, and without sufficient preparation and power to support them, they would be sending themselves to their deaths. Thus, even though the Witches of Death had sworn to take revenge on the Orc God, they still had to be careful when choosing a plane. They even had to deliberately mislead the other party so that they would not know who they really wanted to attack. In Wilning, a large planar gate was being built. The Witches of Death were also becoming more active, using all sorts of methods to search for and investigate the signs of the planes controlled by the Orc God. Logically speaking, these signs were top-notch information that was kept secret. Apart from the higher-ups of the Orc God's faction, no one else should know about it. However, the Magus world and the world of gods had been at odds with each other for tens of thousands of years. Through constant attacks and exchanges, they had a clear understanding of each other. Thus, the Witches of Death only needed to spend some magic crystals to obtain the signs of 17 planes occupied by the Orc Gods faction from the Silver Alliance and the Magus Association. These planes were not half-developed primitive planes. Instead, there were planes of faith filled with the followers of the beast deity, where the indigenous forces were powerful. Furthermore, the Witches of Death had publicly announced that they would give up on any benefits from this plane expedition just to deal a heavy blow to the Orc God's arrogance and take revenge for their dead sisters. Thus, the invasion this time was not for occupation, but for destruction. What the Witches of Death wanted to destroy was not a tribe or an empire, but an entire plane. They planned to use the method of slaughtering the believers of the beast deity in an entire plane to take revenge on the shame that the beast deity had previously imposed on the Witches of Death. In order to confuse the enemy, the Witches of Death even sent a large number of witches to sneak into these planes, creating the impression that the enemy was launching an all-out attack. However, most of these witches were just pawns used to confuse the enemy, and only a few of them had powerful positioning tools on them. Once the target of attack was determined, the Witches of Death would be able to use the signal sent back by the positioning stone to connect the plane door to the enemy's world. All of these would be able to open a portal that would lead directly to the plane of the beast god's believers. At that time, all the major witch factions would have to do was to rush in and kill them all. Of course, it was extremely difficult to completely destroy a plane. One had to find a way to destroy the source of the other plane. Grimm definitely did not have such a method, but the Witches of Death did. Therefore, the Witches of Death entered the other plane in order to destroy the source of the plane. The responsibility of Grimm and the others was to slaughter the believers of the beast deity and destroy the other party's faith nodes. This way, they would be able to disrupt the other party's reinforcements and buy more time for the Witches of Death to cast spells and offer sacrifices. Therefore, the Witches of Death and the Beast Deity had been conducting psychological warfare and feint attacks for half a year around the invasion of this plane. The number of high-ranking members on both sides had reached double digits. Finally, on the 131st day after Thuna's declaration of war, the plane door was completely completed. It was an abnormally huge stone door. The frame of the entire stone door was made of unknown dark stones, and it was densely engraved with countless magic runes. When a powerful magic energy was injected into the base of the stone door, all the runes on the stone door lit up in an instant. Then, a bright film of light slowly opened in the middle of the stone door. Many strange bands of light of different colors floated out of the film of light, dancing and twisting above the stone door. They were intermittent, dancing and twisting like beautiful illusions in a strong magnetic field. Near the stone door, there was a very obvious gravitational disturbance. Many stones, dust, and even heavy carriages lost their gravity and began to float. In other areas, there was a gravity abyss that was hard to see with the naked eye. Any life that stepped into the gravity abyss would instantly have their body and organs crushed by the terrifying gravity, turning into a pile of minced meat. Moreover, such a gravitational disordered region was random, without any pattern to speak of. All the acolytes had already retreated from the teleportation plaza, not daring to go near the plane door. Even a high-ranking magus like Grimm did not dare to walk around carelessly in a place where the magnetic field, gravity, space, and time were obviously distorted. Otherwise, he would be in danger of getting injured. Grimm stood in the southwest corner of the teleportation plaza with his head held high. He narrowed his eyes, which flickered with blue light as he silently scanned the degree of distortion around the plane door. The beautiful bands of light that drifted about seemed light on the surface, but the data that the AI chip scanned back was filled with a glaring red light. 1,117 degrees. These bands of light that looked like beautiful scars were filled with terrifying spatial cracks. Once they hit a person's body, they would be instantly sliced apart. Even if one put up a defensive spell, these bands of light with shocking cutting power could cut through the body along with the shield. The upper half of one's body would be in one plane, while the lower half would be in another. If one did not have a method to defend against the spatial slashes, even a rank 2 magus would die if they were hit by these bands of light. In comparison, the destructive power of the gravitational field seemed negligible. Moreover, the closer one got to the plane door, the more distorted the strange forces became. Passing through the plane door in such a terrifying environment was not something that an ordinary acolyte could handle. The Witches of Death have set off. Alice, who was standing beside him, reminded him softly. Grimm heard this and quickly found the group of Witches of Death. The 2 rank 3 Witches of Death had already arrived in front of the light membrane of the plane door. Using some unknown method, they managed to stabilize and calm the trembling plane door. Immediately, more than half of the abnormalities around the plane door disappeared. Taking advantage of the rare period of peace, the Witches of Death urged a large number of middle-ranked and high-ranked undead to gather together. They staggered and disappeared into the plane door in rows. Among these undead, Grimm immediately recognized the iron zombies, black-blooded zombies, venomous zombies, liches, skeletal monsters, undead warriors, dark knights. Under their escort, there was also a terrifying lich with a white bone crown on his head, wearing a magic robe and holding a short skull staff. He was riding on a tall bone dragon. From time to time, Grimm could see terrifying existences that were at rank 3 and 4. Such high-ranked undead could easily become an undead lord in the skeletal plane. But here, they were only high-level servants and spellcasters of the Witches of Death. The black mass of undead was crowded and filthy. Every one of them was so ugly and twisted that it was unbearable to look at them directly. But their numbers were shocking. They kept teleporting over and over. Even after more than an hour, they still could not see the end of the line. With Grimm's hearing and senses, he could faintly hear battle cries coming from the other side of the plane door. It seemed like the other side was already prepared. Since that was the case, the troops that entered the plane door first would have to endure the fiercest attacks of the enemy. It was no wonder that the Witches of Death placed this group of undead at the forefront. They were basically using them as cannon fodder to wear down the enemies on the other side of the plane door. Roar, with a deafening roar, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, rode on the rank 4 zombie dragon Arteist and appeared majestically. The appearance of the zombie dragon immediately threw the orderly undead troops into chaos. All of the undead moved to the sides in fear and gave way to the huge and sturdy zombie dragon, whose body was covered with greenish-gray rotten flesh and steel-green dragon scales in the middle of the plane door. The zombie dragon Arteist took heavy steps and dashed toward the plane door with large strides. At the same time, it let out a deafening roar at the high-level undead beside it. All of the high-level undead that it targeted couldn't help but tremble and retreat. They looked as if they couldn't bear the zombie dragon's overwhelming ferocity. The zombie dragon Arteist carried Thuna and disappeared into the plane door. Shortly after, a few other high-level witches of the Witches of Death entered the plane door together. It was only at this moment that the undead troops calmed down and started to pour in endlessly. The Witches of Death's troops spent a total of 5 hours before they passed through the plane door completely. Then, it was the Dark Witches' turn. The Dark Witches sent a troop of more than 1,000 people. Other than the Shadow Mastiffs, Shadow Warriors, Shadow Assassins, and other pure shadow creatures, there was also a portion of them that were half-shadow creatures with strange and distorted forms. From them, Grimm could see the physical characteristics of the plane creatures, as well as the coldness and fierceness that were unique to shadow creatures. Their strength also varied. There were terrifying existences at the 3rd and 4th level, and there were also weaklings that had just crossed the 1st level. Chapter 817. The demonic machine army under the banner of the Witches of Destiny was the 4th team to pass through the plane gate. As there were many acolyte-level goblins in the team, the Scarlet Magi had no choice but to cast defensive spells on them and make them drink defensive potions. However, in the process of passing through the planar gate, 12 goblins were crushed into a bloody mist by the distorted force of the plane. The feeling of passing through the planar gate was very strange. Grimm felt that it only took an instant, but the AI chip recorded it as a blank for 17 seconds. In those 17 seconds, Grimm was obviously in a strange state of spatial transition. His brain could not break through the shackles of time and perceive the process. Grimm had a feeling that if he could maintain the activity of his spiritual force during this state of spatial transition, he might be able to influence the entire teleportation process. It was a pity that Alice's spatial innate talent had completely turned into the innate talent of destiny. Otherwise, he might have been able to learn something from her. Grimm opened his eyes with a trace of strange fantasy and was immediately shocked by the bloody and cruel scene of war before him. The area where the teleportation gate was located was a desolate plain. Everywhere was withered and cracked earth and gravel of various sizes. At this moment, there were tens of thousands of creatures and monsters crowding near the teleportation gate, using their own or enemies' blood to irrigate every inch of the land. The tens of thousands of undead that had rushed through the teleportation gate were now crowding around it, using their bloated and ugly bodies to block the enemy's advance. Fighting them to the death were groups of tall and muscular otherworld orcs. They had tall and strong bodies, wide, bloody mouths, and terrifying fangs protruding from their lips. Their eyes were as large as copper bells, and their huge muscles were filled with explosive power. Their skin was light green, their pores were thick, and their blood vessels were as thick as small snakes. They wore simple and crude animal skins or half-body armor, and their exposed skin was covered with strange indigo patterns. Their weapons were very primitive. They were either thick stone rods, huge wolf-tooth clubs, or huge metal axes or war hammers that made one's heart palpitate. From their weapons, it could be seen that these orcs were not good at metal smelting. The metal weapons they used were too simple and primitive. They did not have the exquisite forging patterns and dazzling cold glints of human weapons. However, with their brute force, these crude weapons were still able to unleash shocking power in their hands. They didn't have any spells or abilities. Instead, they relied on their powerful bodies and terrifying strength to fight against the undead army, half-shadow army, and spirit army. However, every time they let out a deafening battle roar, the complicated tattoos on their bodies would surge with a powerful bloodline power, greatly increasing their strength, speed, physique, recovery ability, and magic resistance. Grim stood in front of the portal, squinting his eyes as he silently observed the huge, chaotic, and bloody battlefield. With the help of the AI, Chip's powerful vision, Grim could sense everything within a 7-kilometer radius. When he shifted his attention to a certain area, the AI Chip would quickly enlarge the panoramic view of the area and present it to him. Grim could clearly see that the orc army in front of him was not a primitive tribe like he had imagined. Instead, it was a powerful race that had a clear division of labor and methods of warfare. At this moment, the ones fighting the witches at the front were the green-skinned orcs that he had seen earlier. At first glance, they looked like barbaric and violent warriors, completely relying on brute force and bravery to fight equally terrifying enemies. Behind the green-skinned orcs, Grim saw harpies with eagle bodies and human faces, gnolls that could throw short spears, centaur warriors that could both close and far, orc shamans that had strange totems drawn on their faces, mammoth war elephants that were as tall as small mountains, and cyclopes that could hurl 2-meter-wide boulders hundreds of meters away. This was not a group of barbaric natives without intelligence, but a true orc army. Fortunately, their numbers didn't seem to be too high. At the very least, they had not reached the point where the witches could not handle them. At the beginning of the war, the witches' advance party had risked their lives to bury a positioning stone here to continuously guide the witches of the Magus world to the direction of the teleportation portal. With the guidance of the orc god, the nearby orc tribes quickly gathered, and under the leadership of the orc leader, they charged forward in a frenzy. Fortunately, the reinforcements that had passed through the planar gate arrived quickly. The swarming undead army quickly clashed with the crazed orc army. The orc army continued to rush over, and the teleportation portal also crazily swallowed countless strange creatures. At first, the orcs could still block the witches near the teleportation portal and kill them. However, as the number of creatures that passed through the portal increased, their strength also increased, and the orc army was pushed further and further away. Even though all the orcs were fighting and attacking with all their might, they could not stop the witches from pouring out endlessly. On the ground, the orcs were fighting with the undead and shadow creatures. In the sky, there were strange, semi-illusory spirits fighting with the eagle-bodied men. In the air, sharpened wooden spears fell into the tide of dead spirits and corpses like raindrops, while huge rocks fell from the sky, smashing a black bloody path in the tide of corpses. Overall, the orc army's weapons and armors were too crude and could not match the powerful wizard beasts that the witches had carefully brewed. If it were not for the fact that the defensive line was too crowded, the orc army of almost 30,000 would not have been able to withstand the attack of the wizard beasts. Since they had already come to this battlefield, they could not just be a bored spectator. Grim nodded at the cloned brain Jellu, and the latter controlled the 3-meter-tall mechanical body to stride towards the front of the battlefield. Behind him, rows of metallic magical machines brimming with the aura of iron and blood raised their magical ray guns high, firing synchronously while following Gru's footsteps forward. It had to be said that the wizard beasts created by the witches were indeed powerful, and all of them had terrifying power. However, on the battlefield, they were either clustered around each other, unable to move, or fighting alone. The entire formation was messy and disorderly, and there was no commendable coordination at all. The Magic Machine Legion, led by Jellu, was completely different from the other witches' teams. Hundreds of magic machines were organized in a neat formation. The magic ray guns in their hands might not be powerful individually, but every time they fired as a group, they would choose to overturn an area. Under the concentrated energy rays, even the orc skull crusher, who had a tough body, would be shot to pieces in an instant. His tall and sturdy body was full of dense bloody holes. A single volley could destroy all the orcs within a radius of 100 meters. With such continuous advancement, the orc skull crusher team that was within their attack range immediately became a little unstable. This also opened up a route for the wizard beasts to advance. Hence, in front of the magic machine legion, the dead spirit corpse tide pushed forward, filling in the gaps in the orc teams one after another, causing the orcs' efforts to surround them to be in vain. The performance of the Magic Machine Legion was so eye-catching that it immediately attracted the attention of many powerful witches. They were either floating in the sky or sitting on the backs of their magic pets, all of them looking at the group of inconspicuous metal magic machines in amazement. Although the witches present were not proficient in the technique of creating metal puppets and constructs, they all had some understanding of it. Compared to the simple and convenient wizard beasts, the metal puppets and constructs were extremely troublesome and trivial to create, and they also required a shocking amount of metal ore. Hence, it was not that the witches present did not know how to create metal puppets, but they felt that the price-to-performance ratio was far inferior to their own dead spirits or shadow creatures. It was still quite effective to use them as fixed guards in the wizard's pagoda. However, bringing them out to battle would cause a heartache if one were to be destroyed, and it would be extremely tedious to repair them. He couldn't possibly bring a group of mechanics and a logistics team to transport the puppet parts every time he went out to battle, right? It was precisely because of these various reasons that the witches gave up on using the metal puppets as their main force in battle. However, this did not mean that the metal puppets were not powerful. The metal puppets were loyal, powerful, and astonishingly high in defense. What was more valuable was that they never knew fatigue. As long as there was a sufficient supply of magical crystals, they would be like perpetual motion machines, able to fight until the moment they fell. Almost all of the Magic Machine Legion under the banner of the Witches of Destiny were level 1 metal puppets. However, the battle power they could unleash was much stronger than the disorderly wizard beast army in front of them, and they were much easier to use. The many powerful witches could also clearly see that the strange metal giant walking in front of the Magic Machine Legion was even stranger. As it strode forward, it shot out a blue energy ray from its tall metal body. The bodies of the magic machines that were hit by the energy ray immediately became filled with energy, and the frequency and strength of the ray guns in their hands also increased. Oh, this seems to be a strange energy source, able to charge the entire Magic Machine Legion from a distance. Some of the curious witches could not help but secretly extend their mental energy over. Unfortunately, the energy source's tall metal body was rippling with a layer of crystal-clear energy force field, blocking the witch's mental energy outside. Oh, this is even stranger. It seems to be a strange metal life form. Chapter 8:18. The war was still going on. Unlike battles between 300 to 500 people in a small area, battles involving tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people were especially cruel and bloody. No matter how powerful one was, as long as one wasn't invincible, one had to be cautious and keep a low profile on such an intense and chaotic battlefield. One couldn't be too ostentatious. Otherwise, Grimm had seen with his own eyes an undead knight shrouded in a gloomy aura of death riding on a tall skeletal warhorse. With its powerful grade 3 strength, it was invincible on the battlefield and crushed everyone. Countless orc cranium crushers trembled in front of its tall and mighty skeletal warhorse. Countless orc powerhouses were chopped in half by its 2-meter-long snow-white claws. Wherever it went, the aura of fear followed like a shadow, causing all the orcs to dodge and panic. For a moment, its ferocious aura filled the sky, and no one dared to take it lightly. But soon, it was targeted by a few equally powerful opponents in the orc army. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Amidst the howling wind, a few millstone-sized boulders rolled toward it with ear-piercing sonic booms. The Grade 3 undead knight valiantly swung its sword and shattered 3 of the boulders, but the last one smashed into its body. Its armor twisted and all its bones cracked, and it was sent flying into the crowd of corpses. As for the skeletal warhorse it was riding on, it was smashed into pieces and scattered on the ground. The undead knight struggled to get up from the ground. Although all its bones were broken, the soul fire hidden deep in its skull was still intact. Just as it was trying to absorb the dense aura of death around it to repair its broken body, the ground around it started to shake violently. The Grade 3 undead knight raised its head with difficulty. The scarlet soul fire in the depths of its pitch-black eye sockets suddenly shrank into a pair of sharp red glows in the shape of a cross. It stared in horror at the mammoth war elephant that had smashed through the crowd of corpses and was charging toward it with earth-shattering steps. The other party's body was as large as a small mountain. Its long nose was as agile as a python, and its long tusks were as sharp as a battering ram. What was even more terrifying was that the other party's foot, which was as thick as a stone pillar and as large as a carriage, was stomping towards him with unstoppable force. The mammoth war elephant stampeded over the undead horseman's body, crushing its entire body and its head, which was wrapped in soul fire, into bone fragments. The mournful wail of the Tier 3 undead knight's soul before it died echoed in the void. The orc shaman, perched high on the back of the war elephant, brandished his thick goat horn staff and shouted in a strange language that no one could understand. From time to time, a dazzling red light would condense in his palm and shoot into the body of the war elephant beneath him. A dozen orc javelin throwers gathered around the orc shaman, shouting loudly as they did their best to throw the short spears in their hands into the black tide of corpses under the war elephant's feet. The war elephant's eyes were blood red from the stimulation of the berserk spell. It raised its long trunk and let out a long cry that intimidated everyone present. It lowered its head and charged towards the teleportation gate. In front of the 8-meter-tall mammoth war elephant, most of the undead became dwarves that clustered around the giant. With their size and strength, they were unable to stop the mammoth war elephant's mad charge. However, this extremely arrogant mammoth war elephant only survived 43 seconds longer than the Tier 3 undead horseman. Under the command of the Lich, who was hiding in the tide of corpses, the high-level undead cast a volley of spells and used dense artillery fire to turn the mammoth war elephant and the dozen orcs on its back into sieves. With a mournful wail, the huge mammoth war elephant knelt on the ground, covered in blood, and collapsed. A huge cloud of gray smoke and dust rose from the scene. Blood splattered, and severed limbs and severed heads flew in the air. At the front of the winding battlefield that stretched for several miles, countless orcs were fighting and killing the undead that were like tidewater. They risked their lives without regard for their own safety. However, their lives seemed abnormally insignificant and cheap at this moment. Countless orc warriors were bathed in blood, using their giant axes or warhammers to chop or smash down countless ugly zombies. However, the purplish-black sticky rotten blood that splattered carried terrifying plague and poisonous bacteria. Puffs of yellow and green smoke exploded everywhere on the battlefield, and the orc warriors who were caught in it coughed nonstop. Large areas of festering abscesses caused blood to flow all over their bodies when they moved. Their bulging muscles were rapidly eroding, and their mighty and sturdy bodies began to quickly collapse and rot. Rotten blood zombies, poisonous zombies, plague zombies, the withered and shriveled undead that looked like walking corpses exploded into smoke under the slaughter of the orc army. Soon, most of the battlefield was covered in a terrifying poisonous cloud. Under the control of the high-level undead, these poisonous clouds even started to gather into a plague tide that surged toward the densest part of the orc army. The orc warriors might not be afraid of the strong and tall enemies, but they still didn't dare to face these tiny, fatal bacteria that couldn't be killed or destroyed even if they smashed them. Their originally dense and sturdy ranks began to loosen and collapse. Puff, puff, puff. A series of large fireballs shot out from the back of the orc army, exploding into a sea of fire amidst the plague tide. Countless noises and hisses from the poisonous insects converged into a huge sound wave, reverberating above the battlefield. In an instant, countless poisonous insects and poisonous bacteria were burned to death by the high-temperature flames. Although this move couldn't stop the plague tide from advancing, it greatly reduced the damage caused by the plague. This also allowed the orc army, which had been defending themselves, to breathe a sigh of relief. They didn't immediately collapse. It was the orc shamans who followed the army. The witches at the back of the zombie tide coldly looked at the orc shamans, who were wrapped in animal skins and had feathers on their heads. Their faces and bodies were covered in gaudy mage wreaths. Compared to ordinary orcs, these orc shamans were a little skinny. However, looking at the thick goat horn staffs in their hands, it wouldn't be a problem for them to smash the heads of their enemies. In terms of strength, even the weakest orc warrior in the orc army had a physique comparable to a high-level apprentice. In fact, most of the orc warriors in the army had already reached the level of a quasi-wizard. Based on a normal comparison of strength, an official sorcerer in the sorcerer world could easily slaughter around 10 orc warriors. If there were more orcs, even a rank 1 sorcerer might not be able to avoid some damage. If both sides fought to the death, a rank 1 sorcerer might be able to kill 20 to 30 orc warriors, but he would also die under the opponent's crude stone hammers or battle axes. It couldn't be helped. The body of sorcerer was too weak. As long as the layers of shields and defensive spells were broken, a sorcerer's body might not be any stronger than a normal human's. A slash on the neck or a hole in the stomach could even kill a noble sorcerer. These orc shamans were like a weaker version of an official sorcerer. Their magic power was too simple. Other than a few berserk spells, bloodlust spells, and large fireballs, they had almost no powerful spells. The only strange thing about them was that they could use 4 different types of elemental energy at the same time. Their buff spells, healing spells, and damage abilities were actually completed using strange totems. They inserted wooden totems that were more than a meter tall and as thick as a goose's egg into the ground in front of them, and they could quickly summon the corresponding magic elements in their hands. Although the power of the spells they cast was not great, they were unprecedentedly fast. Grim narrowed his eyes and watched silently from behind. Through the AI Chip's senses, he could faintly feel that the strange magic runes on the orc shaman's bodies and the strange patterns on the totems seemed to resonate with each other in terms of elemental frequency. The vibrations and changes of the magic on both sides seemed to be exactly the same. What was this? Magic resonance or elemental resonance? What method did they use to turn a cold, lifeless object into a living thing that could sense and absorb the magic elements in the air? Was it a miniaturized and weakened version of the elemental altar? A series of questions arose in Grimm's mind. It was no wonder that Magi loved conquering other planes. Indeed, there was a lot of mysterious knowledge and mysteries waiting for them to explore and research in any foreign plane. At this moment, he really wanted to capture an orc shaman and cut open its head to study it. But when he saw the group of Beastman shamans clustered around the sturdy and agile Beastman sword saints, Grimm could only silently suppress this thought. If Cranium Crusher was an ordinary orc warrior, then these orc sword saints were elite orc warriors that tempered their bodies. They were not tall, and their bodies were not as sturdy as ordinary orc warriors. However, they were abnormally agile and nimble when they moved. The weapons they used were not thick and cumbersome warhammers or axes, but flat and narrow fierce sabers or terrifying longswords. This meant that their attacks were mainly swift and agile, and they also had the explosive power of their bodies. If he charged forward and was surrounded by a group of sword saints, the outcome would not be much better than being thrown into a knife formation and being stirred for half a day. The orc sword saints had extreme explosive power and attack speed. Furthermore, The orc shamans could summon elemental energy at their beck and call. Although they did not see any high-ranked existences in their group, Grim, who was a peak grade 2 fire magus, did not dare to rashly face them. In a battlefield filled with ferocious beasts and experts, being cautious and keeping a low profile was the only way to preserve one's life. Not all of the orcs were musclemen who only knew how to use brute force. Under Grim's observation, the group of orcs far behind the orc army was most likely the true powerhouses of the orc army. Chapter 819. Curtis? Fong was silently observing the battlefield. Behind his tall and burly body stood 17 elders and leaders of the Witherwater City's tribal alliance. Among them, the Grade 4 berserker, Morris, was the most irritable and restless. He paced back and forth beside Karades and questioned loudly. The little bastards are already roaring and charging forward. Are we supposed to just stand here and wait? Curtis replied in a deep voice without turning his head. I have already informed the Sala tribe. They will soon bring the 30 Thunder Rocks to join the battle. Thunder Rocks, Thunder Rocks, Thunder Rocks. Do you think we orcs won't fight without the Thunder Rocks? We are not here today to fight, but to destroy the enemy's teleportation portal. Curtis finally turned his head back. His huge bloodshot eyes were filled with unconcealable ferocity. You have heard the orc god's oracle. The enemies this time are not ordinary. They are terrifying witches who have vowed to take revenge. If they're allowed to gain a foothold here, our Johnson plane will be in danger. Then all the more reason why you should let me charge into the battlefield. I'll kill my way through the ground and wait for the Thunder Rocks to arrive. Then you guys can go through the sky. Isn't that better? Morris was still stubborn. Curtis grabbed Morris' collar and glared at him fiercely. You're the most powerful warrior in our team. As the tribal leader of Witherwater City, I order you to calm down and wait for the real battle to come. Hasn't the battle already started? Our brats can't hold on for much longer. If you're not blind, you should have seen it. None of the strong witches have shown up yet. What are they waiting for? The plague beasts under them are powerful and numerous. Our orc army is not a match for them in this battle. So they are waiting for an opportunity to kill our strong orcs. Tell me, if I don't have absolute confidence, would I dare to bet the last force of Witherwater City? The voices of the two orc powerhouses weren't soft. When they roared at each other, the huge sound waves were enough to shake an ordinary human to death. Among the numerous elders and leaders standing behind the two beastmen, there was a Minotaur chief with a humanoid body but a large bull's head. There was also a sphinx with a lion's face and golden fur. There was also a hawkman with a pair of gray wings on his back and a sharp-hooked beak. Among the many elders, the Cyclops elder was undoubtedly the tallest and most conspicuous. From the outside, the Cyclops elder looked like a strong human that had been magnified dozens of times. He had a torso, legs, feet, arms, and a face with ears, mouth, and nose. The only strange thing was that it only had a vertical pupil in the center of its forehead. An ordinary Cyclops was more than 10 meters tall, much taller and mightier than a mammoth battle elephant. The Tier 3 one-eyed elder stood over 12 meters tall. Not to mention anything else, just the finger of its fan-shaped hand was as thick as an ordinary person's waist. The eye in the center of its head blinked continuously, emitting a thick earthen yellow elemental aura. As long as there was a need in battle, the Cyclops elder could use the earth elemental energy in its eye to condense a 2-meter square rock between its palms in 3 seconds. It could then use its divine power to hurl the rock at the enemy's head. Rock tossing was a special ability that the Cyclops had mastered since young. It could hit anything within 500 meters. As a powerhouse of the tribe, the Cyclops elder could even throw a rock 700 meters away. In the Johnson Plain, where weapons were crude and fortifications were crude, such a human catapult was considered a top-notch fighting force. Where a large number of Cyclops gathered, even the proud dragons that soared above the 9 heavens would not dare to enter their attack range. In the long history of the Cyclops, there had been an unparalleled powerhouse that had single-handedly killed a dragon. But now, the Cyclops had lost their freedom and faith. They had become a powerful tribe enslaved by the Orc Empire in the Johnson Plain. At this moment, seeing the two Orc experts arguing, the Cyclops elder Abdul bent down and said in a loud and clear voice, "Curtis, my lads have been fighting for more than 2 hours. They have used up a lot of energy. Do you think we should get them to retreat and rest?" Although the Cyclops could gather earth elemental energy and condense it into rocks, this special ability of their race was not limitless. They might be able to hold out for a long time in a normal battle, but continuously condensing and hurling rocks like this had drained a lot of their stamina and soul. That was why the Cyclops elder Abdul, who felt sorry for his people, made such a request. No, its request was, of course, rejected by the Orc leader. Right now, our battle situation is already very difficult, and it's not looking good. If we don't have the suppression of your boulders, the Orc army will not be able to withstand the enemy's attacks. Tell your people to hold out a little longer. Our assault team will be here soon. Abdul sighed helplessly and stood up again. Beside it, the leader of the Mammoth tribe, Wraith, and the elder of the Centaur tribe, Canum, who also had their people fighting on the battlefield, looked at each other with unconcealable anxiety and regret in their eyes. The Orcs were far weaker than these powerful tribes in terms of strength and physique, but they could use the power of a group to forcibly enslave them. Why? It was because of their jaw-dropping reproductive speed. The Orcs only lived for about 60 to 70 years, and their reproductive cycle was only 13 years. This also meant that an Orc only had a short period of 13 years from birth to the birth of the next generation. And these powerful tribes had incomparably long reproductive cycles. The Cyclops were the most powerful. Their average lifespan was 170 years, and their reproductive cycle was 100 years. The Mammoth were even more powerful. They could live for 150 years, and their reproductive cycle was 60 years. The Centaurs were slightly weaker, but they could live for 120 years, and their reproductive cycle was 40 years. So, even if their individual strength was far above the Orcs, the overall strength of the tribe was far inferior to the weak Orcs who had the blessing of the Orc god. So, seeing the precious younger generation of the tribe struggling to resist the attack of the witches, the elders and leaders of the tribe were all anxious, but there was nothing they could do. On the other side of the battlefield, many high-grade witches were gathered in front of the portal. They watched the bloody battle at the front lines and listened to the reports of the remaining witches' advance team on the basic situation of Johnson Plain. Johnson Plain, a middle-sized plain with rich resources and a variety of creatures. And the ruler of this plain was naturally the main target of the witches' attack, the Orc Empire. The capital of the Orc Empire was a place called Duwiden, which was 12,000 kilometers away. And the closest Orc city to the portal was called Dry Water City. There were 110,000 green-skinned Orcs of various races living there. The Orc army that was surrounding the portal and attacking crazily came from there. According to the information collected by the Witches' advance team, there were as many as 100 strong people in Dry Water City, and these people were all tribal strong people who were grade 3 and above. The Witches' advance team had buried the positioning stones 7 hours ago, and the first batch of Orc attack troops had arrived 5 hours ago. They were a group of up to 300 harpies. If it weren't for the Witches' advance team's equipment and strength, they probably wouldn't have been able to hold on until the witches came across the plain to support them. It was because the witches' action was very covert that the Orc Empire was caught by surprise. Although the positioning stones had just activated the long-range signal, the power of the Orc god had caught it. But from the time it sent down the oracle to the time the nearest Orc tribe gathered and rushed to the battlefield, it still left the witches with the best opportunity to open a long-distance portal across the plain. The Orc troops were constantly moving towards a battlefield, and the witches' troops were constantly pouring out of the portal. Just like that, both sides launched a bloody battle of life and death on this desolate and remote gravel plain. From the current situation of the battle, it was obvious that the witches had the upper hand in the battle. They were driving the orcs away from the portal and constantly consuming their strength. The orc tribes had always been all soldiers. Since there were 110,000 orcs in Dry Water City, they could pull out an orc army of up to 110,000. However, those who could arrive at the battlefield in advance were, after all, the elites of the orc army. As long as they were consumed here, the old, weak, sick, women, and children would be left. Although their strength was not inferior to the human army, it was not worth mentioning in the face of the powerful witches' troops. If this battle was fought well, they might be able to take down Dry Water City as well. In this way, the witches' troops could no longer be regarded as a lonely army. Instead, they would have a strong fortress and stronghold that could advance and retreat at will. Therefore, the witches' decision after discussion was to bury all the orc elites here and not allow them to escape back to Dry Water City. It was precisely because of this decision that although the witches had hoarded a large number of powerful wizard beasts in the rear, they did not put them into the battlefield. Instead, they relied on the low-level corpse tied in front of them to stick to the orc army and bleed them bit by bit. As for the plan of the orc experts in the distance, of course, it had also fallen into the witches' calculations. A group of thunder rocks that were only at grade 2 or 3, how dare they use them as a trump card in such a plane war? They were simply a group of country bumpkins who had never seen the world. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.